Chapter 945. The Prime Minister Liu Bang? The King of Han Liu Bang? With his hands clasped behind his back, Zhang Tingyun frowned as he looked at Liu Bang, whose face was filled with a smile. Today, Liu Bang gave off a very strange feeling, as if the mask on his face had been torn off, revealing a very strange face. He was still the same person, but his aura had become very strange. As for Liu Buwei, he stood behind Liu Bang with a smile on his face, his eyes darting back and forth between the young girls lying on the ground. From time to time, he would click his tongue in admiration, as if he could not wait to indulge these young girls who were as tender as lambs. Prime Minister? King of Han? Zhang Tingyun twitched his lips and said, "Is there a Prime Minister in the Ling dynasty? Is there a title of nobility in the King of Han?" Smiling happily, Liu Bang spread his arms and said, "There was no such title in the past, but now there is." Zhang Tingyun flew into a rage. A 3-feet-long bronze dagger axe emerged from his side, whistling through the air, and piercing toward Liu Bang's heart with a 10-feet-long beam of bright green light. The dagger axe was strangely shaped, and its whole body was engraved with scenes of ancient people offering sacrifices to the heavens. As soon as it was unleashed, a ferocious aura that made one's heart palpitate came rushing at Liu Bang, as if a prehistoric beast had opened its mouth wide and was about to bite at Liu Bang. Soundlessly, a white lotus appeared in front of Liu Bang. Before the bronze dagger axe could get close to Liu Bang's heart, an immortal light burst out from the white lotus, and the dagger axe disappeared without a trace. Zhang Tingyun was stunned. He was shocked to find that the white lotus looked so familiar. Hastily, he raised his head and saw that the supreme treasure of Primal, the white jade lotus, was gone. Zhang Tingyun's body trembled as a chill rushed from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. It was as if he had been struck by 10,000 lightning bolts. He suddenly understood something. Liu Bang gently stroked the white lotus and said gently, "Your Majesty, don't panic. I have no evil intentions towards you." His Majesty was the destined sacred emperor of the human race. Who would dare to be rude to His Majesty? Who dares to hurt His Majesty? Pursing his lips into a smile, Liu Bang bowed deeply to Zhang Tingyun and said, "As for my background, there was no prime minister in the Ling dynasty, but now there is one. The Ling dynasty did not have the title of King of Han in the past, but it did now. In addition, the name of the old man behind me is Liu Buwei. He has the talent to rule the world, and is a rare pillar of the state. Therefore he will be appointed as the imperial court judge of the Ling dynasty, in charge of all the government affairs of the Ling dynasty." Zhang Tingyun was so angry that his face turned green, and the ominous chill in his heart made his face turn pale. His face changed between green and white in an instant, and his body trembled slightly. He did not know whether he was afraid or angry, but his body was trembling uncontrollably, especially when he saw Lord Boyang, who looked exactly like him, and the white lotus floating in front of Liu Bang. Zhang Tingyun's vision went black, and cold sweat kept breaking out all over his body. Pointing a trembling finger at Liu Bang, Zhang Tingyun gnashed his teeth and said, "Without my decree, don't even think about becoming the prime minister or the imperial court judge." Standing behind Liu Bang, Lord Boyang took a slow step forward. Lord Boyang, who claimed to be born with an incomplete soul, and had always been a little simple-minded, raised his chin at Zhang Tingyun and said dryly, "I don't need your consent or decree. I'm the one who decides all these things, and I'll announce my decree to the world." Silently, a triangular pagoda glinting with a green light appeared over Zhang Tingyun's head. The pagoda emitted a strange light of red, white, and blue, with arcs of light swirling like scissors amidst the light. With a murderous intent, it slashed down at Lord Boyang's head. The pagoda was also a treasure given to Zhang Tingyun by the nameless Taoist who had taken him as his in-name disciple. It was a chaotic spirit artifact, and it had the power to kill all physical things. Lord Boyang looked at the pagoda with delight. He nodded repeatedly and said, "It's a good treasure, just what I want. I'll use it often in the future." At his fingertip, the triangular light emitted by the pagoda condensed, and then all the light rushed back into the pagoda with a loud rumble, like the ebbing tide. The pagoda, which was only the size of a human head, left Zhang Tingyun's body in a beam of light, and floated quietly in front of Lord Boyang like an obedient kitten. Zhang Tingyun's entire body was drenched in cold sweat, dripping down along his naked body. He cried out in horror. What's going on? This is a magical treasure that I've refined with my blood, sweat, and soul. How could this happen? What evil method did you use? How could you? At this point, Zhang Tingyun could no longer continue. No matter what evil method Lord Boyang used, the question was, what kind of evil method could take away a magical treasure that a first-tier primordial immortal had refined with his blood, sweat, and soul? It would be fine if it were just an ordinary spirit or immortal artifact with very little power, but it was a chaotic spirit artifact. The White Lotus was even a supreme artifact of primal. Putting aside Zhang Tingyun's cultivation base, both treasures had very strong sentience, which was even stronger than Zhang Tingyun's. If they were not willing, who could take them away? Cold sweat oozed out of Zhang Tingyun's forehead as he staggered backward. His body trembled intensely, and his bones let out ear-piercing creaking noises. Terrified to the extreme, Zhang Tingyun was panting heavily. For some reason, he suddenly thought of his brothers whom he had strangled to death with his own hands after he ascended to the throne. With a strange smile on his face, he approached his brothers who had no power to resist at all. Like Zhang Tingyun today, they gasped violently and retreated in horror. In that great fear, Zhang Tingyun actually felt his lower abdomen burning. He was in an unpredictable danger, but he felt great pleasure. It was a pleasure that was 100 times stronger than the pleasure brought to him by the girls lying on the ground. It was as if his own destruction was the most pleasurable thing in the world. When he heard Zhang Tingyun's cry, Lu Bang pursed his lips into a mocking smile. He kept shaking his head and sighing softly. Your Majesty has indeed refined these magical treasures with your blood, sweat, and soul. But Your Majesty, do you know that a human has 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls? Zhang Tingyun glared at Lu Bang angrily. That was nonsense. Anyone who cultivated the Tao knew that a human had 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Lord Baoang said coldly, there are 2 of us. I have 2 spiritual and 4 physical souls, and you have 1 spiritual and 3 physical souls. By refining these magical treasures with your soul, it's actually the same as me refining them with my soul. My 2 spiritual and 4 physical souls are stronger than your 1 spiritual and 3 physical souls, aren't they? Zhang Tingyun looked at Lord Baoang in horror and roared furiously. This is outrageous. My 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls are intact. How is this possible? Lu Bang laughed. Looking complacently at Zhang Tingyun, whose face was pale and terrified, he asked slowly and proudly, Your Majesty, you have been friends with the Celestial Court for so many years. Have you ever heard of the Forbidden Clans? With their restrictive magic, they divide 1 spiritual and 3 physical souls into 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and then infuse them with the divine ability of the Buddhist League with the power of willpower. Replenish the power of the 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls, and then send them into transmigration. That's how Your Majesty came to be. Lord Boyang stared coldly at Zhang Tingyun and said with a sneer, You've gone through 99,999 transmigrations in your transmigration, and each time, you've absorbed the Emperor's aura more than 90,000 times. In each transmigration, the Buddhist League escorted you into your next life, so every time you reincarnate, your dynasty will grow stronger. With a cold snort, Lord Boyang said coolly, and I, on the other hand, have been tempered day and night by the natal star power of the few emperor stars in the 33 heavens, fusing my soul with the essence of the 6 emperor stars. North Pole, South Pole, Middle Pole, West Pole, and East Pole. What you've accumulated is the Emperor's aura of the human emperor. And what I've accumulated is the Emperor's aura of the Celestial Court. Lu Bang added, when the 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls are reunited, the aura of the Celestial Emperor and the human emperor will blend perfectly, and the real new sacred emperor of the human race will take shape. Once Your Majesty leads the Ling dynasty to sweep across Panga continent, kill all the so-called emperors of those small kingdoms in outer heavenly realms, and absorb all their emperor's aura into your body, no one in the world will be able to resist this mighty emperor's aura. Lu Buwei could not wait to show off. He chuckled and said, Originally, the human emperor of Du inherited the destiny of heaven and earth, and his emperor's aura was unshakable by any external force. But haha, the human emperor of Du has raised a few good sons. Now that Nuyu has split from Duyu's emperor's aura is divided into two parts, and neither of them can compete with the mighty emperor's aura that your majesty has accumulated after gathering the emperor's aura of all the human kingdoms in outer heavenly realms. The fate of the human race is now set in stone. Even if the Wahuang clan rushes out of Empress Wa's palace, she will not be able to reverse the situation. With his hands clasped behind his back, Lord Boyang raised his head proudly and said with a cold grin, "Countless outer heavenly realms have returned to Pangu continent, and the heavenly Tao has bestowed me with immeasurable virtues. I even have the opportunity to fuse with the Tao immediately. Once I do that, the title of the sacred emperor of the human race will be even more deserved. It's time for the Yellow Emperor, Shenong, and the Yen Emperor to step down from their thrones." Zhang Tianyan trembled all over. He looked at Liu Bang and the others in horror and cried out, "What about me? What about me?" Lord Boyang twitched the corner of his mouth and said with a strange smile, "You? Do you exist? You are nothing but an illusory thing. I am who I am, and you are not me." Liu Bang chuckled and said, "Of course you're still useful. For example, this body of the crown prince is going to do something beneficial to the Ling dynasty, and he needs a divine lord to take charge of it. When the time comes, I'll have to trouble your majesty to make the trip." Zhang Tingyan's body trembled. He threw his head back and gave a long roar, then suddenly soared into the sky and transformed into a beam of golden light, about to rush out. With a casual point of his finger, Zhang Tingyan's body twitched, and then he suddenly fell out of the golden light with a strange cry. "I am who I am, and you are just the representation of my one spiritual soul in 3 physical forms. You don't have the chance to make the decision," said Lord Boyang in a deep voice. With a cracking sound, Lord Boyang's forehead split open, and his 2 spiritual souls and 4 physical forms turned into 6 balls of bright light, 2 purple and 4 gold. They slowly flew over to Zhang Tingyan, who was screaming in fear, and slowly squeezed into the top of his head. Zhang Tingyan's body twitched, and a line of blood split open between his brows. A hazy, powerless shadow came out of it, and was forced to slowly fuse with Lord Boyang's body. This shadow was Zhang Tingyan's everything, a trace of nothingness left behind by Lord Boyang's 1 spiritual soul and 3 physical forms after he had reincarnated over 90,000 times. Before long, the reborn Zhang Tingyan slowly opened his eyes and rose to his feet. Glancing at Lord Boyang, who was standing stiffly, Zhang Tingyan waved his hand lightly. "Send him to the border and let him die a better death." Chapter 946. Even gods and ghosts were afraid of villains. As Wuxia showed off his strength, the starlight in the sky faded away at the same time, leaving only the sun hanging high in the sky. The sunlight it emitted seemed to be even hotter. Celestial Lord of Sun was also a subject of the celestial court. He could hover high in the sky and peep at anything he wanted, and no one could accuse him of malice. After all, it was his job to shine on all things. No one answered his question, and there was no need to. Dozens of the largest rivers in the eastern region of Yu were being flooded by the East Sea, with waves rushing straight into these rivers that were hundreds of miles wide. These rivers were vast and led straight to the hinterland of the Far East controlled by the Ling dynasty. Through these rivers, the navy of the East Sea could easily invade the territory of the Ling dynasty. If the dragon kings of the East Sea were allowed to raise the flood and do whatever they wanted, the people of the Ling dynasty might even be wiped out. Wuxia paid no attention to the army, and all his attention was on Lord Boyang, who was riding a black qilin and looking at him with a strange smile on his face. Holding the maces with both hands, Lord Boyang smiled and nodded at Wuxia as a greeting. Then he raised the maces and swung them down, smashing his head like a rotten watermelon. When Wuqia's cultivation base reached the level he was at, he had the so-called ability to predict good and bad with a snap of his fingers. When the spies of the East Sea sent him the intelligence about the Ling dynasty and Zhang Tingyan, Wuxia instinctively felt a great threat. That was why he made the decision to return to the East Sea in person, lest any mistake would lead to a problem in his lair. Wuxia snorted as he looked coldly at the sun, which seemed to have doubled in size. In the short term, Great Wu would not have a conflict with a major power like Nuyu. and would only gradually sweep away the human kingdoms from outer heavenly realms to the east and west. There would be many small-scale battles, and a large number of soldiers would be killed or wounded. The blood-draining celestial fiend's clones could use the blood essence of the dead soldiers to improve the cultivation base of the Blood Sea Grand Magic. At the same time, Wuxia had formed a Dark-Een celestial tower with these clones, who could also use the natural energy in Great Wu's underground energy veins to speed up the cultivation of a group of powerful soldiers. Holding Princess Zhongli's hand with a smile, Wuxia suddenly looked up and glared at the sky. "Are your dog eyes blind? What is there to see?" Thousands of soldiers in the cabins of the two flying ships were severely wounded. Hastily, the oracles on the ships incanted a spell and brought up a gust of wind to send the soldiers to the nearby flying ships. Dozens of oracles raised their hands and began to recite the incantation taught by Princess Zhonglu. Pangu's sacred energy poured into the soldiers' bodies, healing their broken bones and tendons at a frightening speed. Dozens of oracles raised their hands and recited the spell taught by Princess Zhonglu. Immediately, Pangu's sacred energy poured into the soldiers' bodies, healing their broken bones and tendons at an astonishing speed. Fortunately, the celestial court on Pangu continent could not directly intervene. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for them to do anything. But this situation would not last long. Once the celestial court conferred a new celestial lord, they could also confer the title of mountain god, water god, earth god, city god, and other basic deities. These minor deities existed widely in the mortal world, and they only needed to move to Pangu continent. In addition to Tu Xiaobai, Wuqi's 18 blood-draining celestial fiends were also here. Chu Ping stuck a finger into the heart of Lord Boyang's corpse. He squinted and carefully tried to identify something. After a long time, he nodded and said, "Strange, he seems to have transferred his soul once, and then a foreign divine sense was injected into him. It's just that the foreign thing is not even a soul, but a violent divine sense at most. What's going on?" Besides, with the hatred of Lord Baoang, the crown prince of the celestial court, the celestial court could intervene even more confidently. Billowing black smoke rolled out of the East Sea city. Standing on it, Wu Qi came to the flagship of the East Sea's army. Princess Zhonglu and the other high-ranking officials of the East Sea hurried out to greet him. They knew that the one who showed up now was not the clone of the blood-draining celestial fiend that he usually used as a disguise, but his true self. As soon as Ao Buzin came out, he threw his head back and let out a long roar. Countless water monsters in the East Sea roared in unison, and huge waves rose into the sky, exploding in the sky and turning into a thick mist that enveloped the void. The vast expanse of Donghai, together with tens of thousands of provinces in the eastern region, was blanketed by a thick layer of watery clouds, filled with a towering demonic aura. The sun tried its best to emit blazing sunlight to break through the thick layer of demonic clouds, but with Ao Buzin's dragon power, it was not that easy to break through. After everything was settled and Giguzi and MOD were in charge of Great Wu's politics, Wu Qi had nothing to worry about, so he returned to the East Sea leisurely. With a soft shout, a loud boom rang out near the natal stars of the star lords of the heavenly courts, which were extremely high up in the starry sky. A strange gleam flickered in Wu Qi's eyes as he activated the Eyes of Thousand Ghosts, a mystic eye technique of the human race. A powerful evil force turned into an invisible blast and shot into the sky. Tu Xiaobai was now a demon immortal who had come to Great Wu's side, and the demons and fiends she had abducted along the way were another pawn Wu Qi had placed in Great Wu. The task Wu Qi had given her was not to interfere too much in Great Wu's war. In any case, wherever Great Wu's territory expanded, she would just have to take all the demons and fiends under her command. With the East Sea's army obscuring their eyes and ears in the sky, and with the death of Lord Boyang in front of the army in the East Sea, the celestial court had enough reason to intervene. Gradually, the army of the East Sea spread out in a straight line on both flanks. Wu Qi's warship stood out in the front, while tens of thousands of flying ships flew forward in a formation shaped like a bird. Wu Qi's warship was the head of the bird. Wherever the army passed, the slogan "Conquer the Ling Dynasty, Punish the Unscrupulous and Incapable Emperor" rang out. Along the way, the garrisons of various provinces and counties, as well as the garrisons of the military towns the East Sea had deployed here, lined up in midair to greet the army. After so many years of reproduction and rest under Wuqi's rule, the fertility of those water spirits and fiends had become extremely amazing. For example, a mola mola could lay billions of eggs at a time. Under the connivance and protection of Wuqi, the total number of the navy of the East Sea was not amazing, but it was terrifying. The total number of the navy was more than 10 times that of the human soldiers of the East Sea. Even the few dragon kings could not figure out how many soldiers they had. In the Great Hall of Great Wu's Imperial Advisor's mansion, dozens of strange-looking demon immortals with a strong demonic aura were standing respectfully. Their leader was none other than Tu Xiaobai, the rabbit demon whom Wuqi had taken in years ago. By Wuqi's order, Tu Xiaobai had traveled thousands of miles from the East Sea to Great Wu, subduing countless mountain spirits and fiends along the way. These dozens of demon immortals were the leaders of those mountain spirits and fiends, the leaders who occupied land and ruled themselves as kings. You bastard! You're framing me. Chu Ping, who had the best temperament and the best temper among the 6 emperors, could not help but curse and stomp his warship so hard that it almost fell apart. The furious Chu Ping waved his hands repeatedly, leaving countless gray beams of light in the air. Suddenly, Lord Boyang's body flew up and fell into his hand. Once every mountain, every river, every land, and every city on Pangu continent had one or more gods conferred by the Celestial Court. The Celestial Court would not be able to hide anything from the people on Pangu continent. Only then would Pangu continent truly fall into the hands of the Celestial Court. Wuqi twitched his mouth sullenly. The Celestial Court controlled 84,000 celestial lords, and the advantage they had was too great. For example, when the army was marching to war, all the celestial lords in the sky were staring blankly at Pangu continent. It was not a good feeling. Above the East Sea, tens of thousands of flying ships, large and small, hovered in midair, with countless soldiers standing neatly on the decks of Chi-Chi's ships. Swords and spears were dazzling, armors were glowing, and banners were blocking the sun like clouds. The dull beating of drums and the shrill, sonorous sound of horns rolled up the ocean, and a few dragon kings could be seen vaguely in the midst of the waves, commanding countless water spirits and water monsters. A mighty dragon aura spread across the boundless waters of the East Sea. The whole East Sea was under its control, ready to roll up monstrous waves at any time. Wuqi and Princess Zhonglu were startled at the same time, and all the civil and military officials of the East Sea cried out in alarm at the same time. Lord Boyang's body had already fallen like a ragged hemp ribbon. When Wuqi returned to the East Sea, Princess Zhonglu was mobilizing the armies of the 6 states to cooperate with the Central Army of the East Sea, preparing to launch an all-out attack on the Ling dynasty. The dozens of celestial lords of the Celestial Court, who were using the power of their natal stars to spy on the movements of the East Sea's army, gave a muffled grunt. Caught unprepared, they felt a sharp pain in their ears and a stabbing pain in their eyes. Tears, which had not appeared in their eyes for many years, rolled down their cheeks and fell to the ground. Before using the power of their natal stars to strengthen themselves, most of these celestial lords were only ordinary gold immortals, and some were even heaven immortals. How could they withstand Wuqi's deliberate attack from across the air? Throwing his head back and spitting out a mouthful of crimson flame, the Black Chelan's body burst into a raging fire, and burned his flesh and bones to ashes in the blink of an eye. A wisp of his true soul was nowhere to be seen, just like the soul of Lord Baoang that day. Wuqi could not find out where it had gone. Suppressing the countless thoughts in his mind, Wuqi took Princess Zhongli's hand and stood side by side at the bow of the warship. Surrounded by the civil and military officials of the East Sea, the tens of thousands of ships sailed eastward. Above the ocean, Lord Xianxing led countless naval forces as they sailed eastward, stirring up the waves and making the mist in the sky thicker and thicker. Those who had the bloodline of spirit beasts or even divine beasts must be carefully monitored, and their absolute loyalty to Wuqi must be cultivated. With the blood-draining celestial fiend in charge, this was not difficult to achieve. This was the advantage that human soldiers had when fighting on Pangu continent. Unless their heads were cut off, other injuries were nothing to them. The Black Chelan looked at Wuqi and the others in horror, and hissed, How dare you kill the crown prince of the celestial court? By heaven, the celestial court will not let you go. If it were not for the fact that Wuxia did not want to alarm the celestial court at this time and give the celestial court a chance to openly intervene and retaliate, he would have struck harder and let these celestial lords know what it meant to be deaf and blind. Just as the army was about to reach the eastern border, 2 gales of green wind, each about a mile across, wrapped in 2 wheel-like objects, shot over and hit the 2 python flying ships on either side of Wuxia's warship. Numerous runes appeared on the deck of the flying boat, and all the defensive restrictions on the flying boat were automatically activated. But the 2 gales were so powerful that the wheels smashed into the ship's bow, destroying the internal structure of the ship as easily as crushing dry weeds and breaking through the stern. Chapter 947. The moment Lord Boyang committed suicide, a furious roar came from the far east. How dare you? How dare you kill my best friend? I'm going to fight you to the death with the army of the entire empire. Zhang Tingyun's roar sounded like 10,000 dragons leaping into the sky. Streams of purple smoke rushed over from the east, shattering the thick fog and demonic clouds rolled up by the navy of the East Sea. Thousands of flying ships of the East Sea at the forefront creaked, as the main structures inside them cracked and fell to the ground. In dozens of great rivers, the aquatic creatures of the East Sea who followed the army of the East Sea to the east howled miserably. Hundreds of thousands of fish, prawns, crabs, and clams exploded and died, and were quickly devoured by the sharks and whales of the navy. The purple smoke that looked like a flood dragon rushed toward the army of the East Sea like a shooting star. Wuxia gave a cold snort. His long hair stood on end as a vast black smoke billowed out of his body. All of a sudden, his body grew hundreds of feet tall and transformed into the body of a dragon man. Then he raised both fists and punched the void in front of him. The void rippled like water, and all the purple smoke shattered. Wuxia waved his hands in front of him, drawing a huge blood rune 1,000 feet in diameter. Then he bit the tip of his tongue and spat a mouthful of blood onto the rune, then held it with both hands and pressed it inward, compressing it into a drop of blood like the size of a needle tip. Then he flicked his wrist and threw it forward. In a flash, the blood light pierced through the distant space and shot straight toward Zhang Tingyun, who was sitting on the throne in the great hall of the myriad spirit palace of the Ling dynasty. When the courtiers of the Ling dynasty saw the drop of blood light shooting toward Zhang Tingyun's forehead with a shrill ghost howl, they bellowed in unison and prepared to intercept it. Zhang Tingyun scolded. All the civil and military officials bowed to Chi-Chi. Zhang Tingyun carelessly grabbed the blood talisman pointed out by Wuxia, laughed mockingly and said, "Even a grain of rice can be released." Bang! The 33 evil-suppressing magic talismans that Zhang Tingyun had left on his palm were shattered by the blood-red light. The small blood-red light blasted out, and a great evil power blasted Zhang Tingyun's right palm into pieces. The evil power flowed through Zhang Tingyun's meridians and blood vessels, causing his blood vessels to swell to the size of a thumb, drilling into his body like countless poisonous snakes. With a furious cry, Zhang Tingyun's white lotus flower quietly flew up into the sky. Beams of immortal light sprinkled down, calming the evil power in him in an instant. His wounded arm healed rapidly as well, and before long, it was as good as new without leaving a scar. Zhang Tingyun's face twisted after making such a fool of himself in front of so many courtiers, and a ferocious, murderous look rose from between his brows. "Men, deploy the army. I'll lead the army myself. I'll sweep through the East Sea, conquer Liangzhu, and open up a new era for the human race." A series of orders were issued. In addition to the main army led by Zhang Tingyun to attack the East Sea, a dozen smaller armies were sent to sweep through Penghu continent. To avoid provoking Du Yu and Nu Yu, the 2 behemoths, the army of the Ling dynasty took a detour through the southern and northern regions, specifically targeting the kingdoms of the human race that had come to Penghu continent from outer heavenly realms. They killed their emperors, extracted their emperor aura, and fused it into Zhang Tingyun's body, thus making him the human emperor. After Lord Boyang and Zhang Tingyun's souls had merged back into one, all of Zhang Tingyun's shortcomings had been inherited, and he had gained a murderous and violent aura out of nowhere. Although the original Zhang Tingyun was arrogant and willful, he was careful in everything he did. like a poisonous snake hunting its prey. He would only strike with all his strength when he was about to kill, never giving his enemy any chance, and never putting himself in danger. But what about the new Zhang Tingyun? Liu Bang, the king of Han, the prime minister of the Ling dynasty, frowned as he stood next to his throne. Zhang Tingyun's behavior just now was very strange. Why did he stupidly try to catch the spell that Wuxia had shot at him from afar? If it were the original Zhang Tingyun or Lord Boyang, they would not have made such a mistake. So, why did this happen when their souls had merged back into one? Perhaps it was because his soul had just been settled, and he was a little emotional. Liu Bang could only comfort himself in this way. He had learned from the South Emperor that the Celestial Court had put in a lot of effort for the sake of Zhang Tingyun, and that Zhang Tingyun's background was not simple either. He was once a very important figure in the Dao League, and had held a high position in the Celestial Court. Liu Bang suspected that this Zhang Tingyun might even be one of the great celestial emperors who had fallen in the Celestial Court. And that was the question. If Zhang Tingyun was really the reincarnation of such a figure, why did he make such an unwise move just now? Even if he was protected by the White Lotus, as the emperor, he should not have been so rash. With his eyelids drooping, Liu Bang kept all this in mind. The Ling dynasty was very efficient, and the reason the Ling dynasty had come to Panga continent was to wage war and build a great cause. Therefore, with just an order from Zhang Tingyun, the mighty army of the Ling dynasty was assembled in just 2 hours, and under the leadership of Zhang Tingyun, they charged toward the western border. Meanwhile, the other 18 legions, large and small, marched in all directions to wipe out the kingdoms of the human race and bring them under the rule of the Ling dynasty. The East Sea army led by Wuxia cautiously crossed the eastern border and stepped into the territory now controlled by the Ling dynasty. The blood talisman just now did not seriously injure Zhang Tingyun, which made Wuxia feel a little tricky. The fact that the White Lotus protecting Zhang Tingyun was a supreme artifact of primal made Wuqi's head swell. Only those who came from the chaotic world knew what kind of freakish thing a supreme artifact of primal was. Those who owned a supreme artifact of primal had an absolute advantage over those who did not. Although the Heaven Refining Cauldron was also a supreme artifact of primal, it was purely an auxiliary item. Compared with the White Lotus, it was much weaker in battle. As for Zhang Yunting's cultivation base, Wuqia did not take it seriously. A peak-level Dao Reasoning Realm cultivator was nothing to Wuqia. With his fingers moving quickly, Wuqia calculated the position of the stars today with the art of star divination taught to him by Gigazi. Then he ordered the East Sea's fleet to line up according to the position of the stars, forming a round formation that combined offense and defense, and slowly moving toward the city closest to the eastern border of the Ling dynasty. The sky above the city, whose name had not even been carved on the plaque above the city gate, was shrouded in smoke and clouds. The guards in the city had already activated the city defense mechanism. In the face of the overwhelming fleet of the East Sea, the people of the Ling dynasty who were working outside the city let out deafening cries and screams. They frantically rushed to the nearest city and village, praying that these seemingly solid city walls could give them shelter. But the East Sea's fleet came too fast. When more people were still running in the fields, they were captured by the oracles of the East Sea on the flying ships and forcibly brought into the ships. Wherever the flying ships passed, not a single tile was left. All the houses were crushed, and all the people were taken away. The army only stopped when they were less than 10 miles away from the city. Wuqi's ship was 30 miles long, and its huge size was suffocating. But the thousands of guards on the city wall did not panic at all. A general of the Ling dynasty, clad in heavy armor, even flew to a place less than 1,000 feet in front of the ship, pointed at Wuqia, and snapped, "This is the territory of the Ling dynasty. Get out of here now. This is not a place you should come to." Wuqia was silent for a moment, then said with a smile, "I suppose the emperor of the Ling dynasty, Zhang Tingyun, is the so-called new emperor of the human race?" The general suddenly became extremely fanatical. "My emperor is the sacred emperor of the human race, destined to rule the human race for generations to come, and the throne to last forever. The human race on Panga continent has decayed. My emperor will change the dynasty, open up a new era for this world, and build a new era for the human race. Wuxia looked at the general, who had the cultivation base of a gold immortal. He was a real gold immortal, and what he was practicing was not the cultivation technique of the human race, but the immortal magic of the Tao League. Wuxia could not help but sneer. The human race did not recognize the immortals as the human race. Relying on a group of immortals to open up a new era for the human race, and build a new era for the human race? What a ridiculous idea. Wuxia wanted to argue with the general, but Princess Zhonglu pointed a finger out, and a beam of blood-red light pierced through the general's forehead. With a snap, the general's body exploded into blood and gore, while a soul flew up into the sky and disappeared without a trace. When the general's soul flew up, no less than 100,000 soldiers in the East Sea Army cast restrictive spells almost at the same time, trying to capture it, including Chu Ping and a group of civil officials who were the most proficient in the art of ghosts and gods in Great Chu, including Chi-Chi. But the general's soul was as slippery as a loach in oil. Countless restrictive spells missed their target at the same time, and his soul disappeared in a flash. This was not the first time they had encountered such a situation. When Lord Baoang was killed, his soul also disappeared in a flash. Everyone was shocked. What was going on? Wuxia pondered for a moment, then frowned and suddenly reached out his hand. A group of trembling soldiers of the Ling dynasty on the city wall screamed as Wuxia pulled out a dozen of them. The blood centipede sword flew up, and a dozen heads flew up into the sky amidst the blood-red light, while a dozen bloody souls screamed and soared into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. As soon as the sword flew out, Wuxia had cast a soul-capturing spell to imprison these souls. But to his surprise, his spell was resisted by a tremendous force. No matter how hard he tried, he could not capture the souls of these soldiers who were only heaven immortals. Princess Zhongli's eyes darted around as she casually pressed her palm down. In the river below, a crucian carp with the cultivation base of Jin Dan exploded into pieces. Its soul flew timidly into the sky, and then Princess Zhonglu reached out her hand, trying to capture it, but to no avail. It seems. Wuxia and Princess Zhonglu exchanged a glance. It seemed that the other party had completed the most important setup. Just as Wuxia was calculating the impact of this situation, clouds of smoke billowed ahead. The army of the Ling dynasty led by Zhang Tingyun, an army larger than the army of the East Sea, was approaching at high speed on a cloud. Suddenly, the stars in the sky glowed brightly. Nearly 1,000 small stars located at the edge of the sky, which were not very important, flashed rapidly and shot down from the sky, falling into the ranks of the Ling dynasty's army in a flash. Wuxia's expression changed abruptly. The celestial lords of the celestial court had descended to the world, and they had struck. It seemed that the celestial court's plan was complete, and they could not wait to swallow the fat meat that was Pangu continent. Chapter 948. Zhang Tingyun's chariot flew out of the Ling dynasty's army and toward East Sea County, which was about 100 miles away. The magnificent chariot was hundreds of feet long, and was driven by 3 gold immortals, 36 supreme oracles, 18 primordial immortals, and a considerable number of military officers of the Ling dynasty, who had reached the level of Hongming Panga heaven by practicing the cultivation technique of the human race, were displayed on the chariot. Treasures of land and water were displayed on the chariot, dazzling and dazzling. Dozens of enchanting maids were serving on the chariot. Celestial melodies could be heard from the chariot, and a faint floral fragrance wafted around the chariot. 18 golden dragons were pulling the chariot, each with a silver beard and a golden horn, and their claws glinting with a cold gleam. They were all upper-grade true dragons with pure-blooded bloodlines, with the cultivation base of gold immortals. Wuxia's facial muscles were twitching at the sight of such an imposing manner, and such a ceremonial procession. The chariot came to a halt when it was about 60 miles away from East Sea County, and Zhang Tingyun's voice came from afar. "King of East Sea, can I have a chat with you?" Wuxia pondered for a moment, then took Princess Zhongli's hand, and was about to fly out to talk to Zhang Tingyun. But Ao Buzin grabbed Wuxia and gave him a cold snort as he said, "That won't do, master. If you fly out alone, won't you bring shame to the East Sea?" Blinking at Ao Buzin, Wuxia asked in surprise, Then, what are you going to do? Ao Buzin whistled triumphantly. A section of the deck at the rear of the warship slowly slid open, and a chariot flew out, which stunned Wuxia and made Princess Zhongli roll her eyes. As soon as the chariot appeared, all the civil and military officials of the East Sea gasped. No one knew when Ao Buzin had prepared such a big thing that could only be described as extravagant. The carriage itself was not a big deal. The carriage was square in shape and had 3 floors. Its entire body was made from the materials used to forge the Tower of Babel. The black carriage was engraved with countless images of gods and ghosts, and each statue was so lifelike that it looked like a real thing. On the top floor of the chariot were the thrones for Wuxia and Princess Zhongli, which were wide enough for 7 or 8 people to roll on. The chariots on the lower 2 levels were guarded by 108 tall, heavily armored longbow men, all of whom had the cultivation base of peak-level gold immortals. Given their incredible innate talent, these peak-level gold immortals could almost fight against Dao-reasoning cultivators who had just stepped into the realm of primordial. If they were to fight in close quarters, those cultivators who had just stepped into the realm of primordial would probably suffer a great loss. The chariot was driven by 3 feathermen whose cultivation base had reached the realm of peak-level gold immortals. They were tall, their feathers were a magnificent golden color, and when they spread their huge wings, they looked like the legendary rocks that had descended to the mortal world. Putting these aside, the most exaggerated thing was the 3,600 jade dragons that looked as if they were made of jade that were pulling the carriage. Each of these yulong was no more than 3 feet long, but the dragon aura they emanated was extremely pure and strong, and all of them had the cultivation base of 18th tier gold immortals. The most shocking thing was that ordinary yulong only had 4 feet under their bellies. On each foot, flood dragons had 3 claws, heaven dragons had 4 claws, and true dragons had 5 claws. Legend has it that the few divine dragon elders with the highest seniority in the dragon clan had 5 legs under their abdomens, and each leg had 5 claws. This was the symbol of their pure bloodline. But these 3,600 Zioyalong all had 7 feet under their bellies, which made them look very different from the dragons that ordinary people were familiar with. They did not even look like dragons at all. But only the true almighty experts in the universe, those who had lived since the primordial era, knew that Arko Zulong had 9 feet under his belly, and each foot had 9 claws. The more feet and claws the dragons had, the purer their bloodline was. With 7 feet and 7 claws, if these Zioyalong came to the lair of today's dragons, all the elders of the dragons would kowtow to them and call them patriarchs. Dragons attached great importance to hierarchy, so these Zioyalong were definitely the ancestors of today's dragons. Ao Buzin pointed triumphantly at the Zioyalong that were pulling the chariot. He laughed out loud and slapped immortal Jadebone's buttocks, which made her so angry that she twisted and pinched his waist. Ao Buzin laughed and said, "Master has been running around outside these years. As for Lao Tzu, hee." While Wuxia had been running around outside, Ao Buzin had been hiding in the spirit cave under the city of the East Sea, wholeheartedly reproducing with immortal jade bone. The iron law that the more powerful a creature was, the more difficult it was to reproduce did not work on Ao Buzin at all. With the help of Dark Een Celestial Tower, he had spent tens of thousands of years in the spirit cave, and produced tens of thousands of descendants with immortal jade bone. These descendants had mixed with the flood dragons in the East Sea, and produced a large number of dragons in the East Sea. With Ao Buzin's bloodline, even the descendants of his children and the flood dragons were purer than the bloodline of the most senior elders of the dragons. These 3,600 Zioyalong were the most recent children born to Ao Buzin and immortal jade bone. Ao Buzin's instinct was too strong, and immortal Jadebone's own energy essence was strong enough. She gave birth to 3,600 dragon eggs, and after 100 years of incubation, there were 3,600 little dragons, whose bodies were crystal clear and looked like they were carved out of beautiful jade. Wuxia did not know that Ao Buzin had done so many good deeds in the past few years. As he listened to Ao Buzin's proud boasting, his fingers went numb. Trembling, he pointed at Ao Buzin and scolded, "You bastard! You let your own son pull the chariot?" If it were not for the fact that he had been friends with Ao Buzin for so many years, Wuqi would have kicked him to death. Aobuzin looked at Wuqi and said confidently, "There are so many sons and grandsons of dragons. Now many of them are pulling chariots for others, or even being mounts, aren't they? Tut, even if my son, only pulls chariots for you, can't he? Anyway, you used Lao Tzu as your mount, didn't you? Anyway, we can't lose face. Look at that guy. He used 18 real dragons to pull chariots, so we'll use 3,600 divine dragons to pull chariots." Wuqi blinked his eyes and could not understand this logic for a long time. Aobuzin grabbed Wuqi and put Wuqi on the throne with a cackle. As Aobuzin had said, for the sake of face, it was not a big deal to let his son pull chariots for Wuqi. Anyway, he had been Wuqi's mount for a while. Wuqi looked at Jadebone Immortal helplessly. She was also cackling. Only then did Wuqi realize that Jadebone Immortal was an immortal of the Devil League. It was impossible for him to have any mother-son relationship with her. Looking at the 3,600 Xiaoyalong, which were no more than 3 feet long, Wuqi could not help but feel sad. Poor children, how did they end up with such a pair of horrible parents? Huangliang led a group of generals with the highest cultivation base in the East Sea to guard the extremely luxurious and pompous chariot. The 3 feathermen who were driving the chariot shouted, and the 3,600 Xiaoyalong breathed out clouds and mist at the same time, easily pulling the chariot forward. Sitting on the throne, Wuqi heard Aobuzin whispering to Jadebone Immortal, "What do you think of Lao Tzu's idea? Master doesn't need this chariot at ordinary times. When we go out, we can let these little bastards pull the chariot. That will be the best." Wuqi almost vomited blood. Was this chariot forged by Aobuzin for himself? Jadebone Immortal smiled with satisfaction and said in a low voice, "Isn't that right? This chariot is 100 times better than the chariots of the great emperors of the Devil Realm. I've worked so hard to raise these little bastards, so it's only right for them to pull the chariot." Sitting next to Wuqi, Princess Zhongli's face twitched. She closed her eyes and blocked her hearing, barely holding back the urge to jump up and kick Aobuzin and Jadebone Immortal to the ground and beat them up. With Wuqi's child in her belly, Princess Zhongli's maternal instincts were aroused. How could she tolerate Aobuzin and Jadebone Immortal mistreating her own child? Perhaps she would not return the chariot to Aobuzin. As for the 3,600 lovely Xiaoyalong, Princess Zhongli was going to take them over herself and train them well. It would be fine if they were those hideous black dragons or demon dragons, but how could she let Aobuzin and the others abuse such a lovely Xiaoyalong? The 3,600 Xiaoyalong formed an array of 180 by 20, pulling the chariot all the way to Zhang Tingyun's chariot. Finally, they stopped when they were about a mile away from Zhang Tingyun's chariot. When Zhang Tingyun, who was drinking wine from a jade cup, saw the 3,600 Xiaoyalong, his fingers loosened, and the cup fell to the ground with a clang. The 18 true dragons who had been pulling the chariot were even more obedient. They had long retracted their clouds and glows, bent their 4 legs and lowered their gigantic heads, showing their utmost respect to these powerful beings of the dragon kind. Lu Bang's eyes went wide as he stared at the 7-legged and 7-clawed Xiaoyalong. He swayed and almost fell to the ground. 7 legs and 7 claws. This was a characteristic that only the pure-blooded divine dragons could have. After countless apocalypses, the dragons had been greatly impacted. Countless pure-blooded divine dragons had fallen, and the remaining dragons had been forced to mix with various flood dragons and pythons in order to reproduce their bloodline. As a result, dragons with the bloodline of divine dragons were extremely rare nowadays. 3,600 divine dragons were used to pull the chariot. Lu Bang was trembling all over. Even the few patriarchs of Dao League did not have such extravagance. Even if the 9 Daozu of Dao League wanted to use divine dragons to pull the chariot, they would not be able to find so many pure-blooded divine dragons. Zhang Tingyun and Lu Bang looked at Wuqi and Princess Zhonglu at the same time. The more they looked at them, the more enigmatic they felt. Aobuzin stood next to Wuqi, proudly arching his lower abdomen. He chuckled and said, "Are you surprised? Are you shocked? Are you frightened by so many divine dragons? Hey, damn it, immortal Jadebone. How much do you think they are willing to pay for a pure-blooded divine dragon?" Wuqi could not bear it any longer. He performed a secret spell and sealed the mouths of Ao Buzan and Immortal Jadebone, so that they could not move or speak. These two bastards, how did they end up as a pair? With a cold snort, Wu Qi cupped his fists at Zhang Tingyun and said, Emperor of the Ling dynasty, I pay my respects to you. Zhang Tingyun glanced at Princess Zhanglu, his eyes flashing with lust. Then, Zhang Tingyun focused all his attention on the 3,600 Xiaoyalong. He looked at Wu Qi and said in a deep voice, King of East Sea, these little dragons are not yet adults, right? How could you have the heart to let them pull the chariot? Well, if I'm interested in buying them, I wonder if the King of East Sea would sell them? Zhang Tingyun's question nearly made Wu Qi cough out blood. He snorted grumpily and cried out coldly, I'm not selling. Zhang Tingyun was about to say something when Wu Qi snapped impatiently, If you have something to say, just spit it out. Hurry up and tell us. Can we start the fight now? A surge of anger rose in Zhang Tingyun's heart. He sneered and slowly rose to his feet. Chapter 949. The faces of Lu Bang and Lu Buwei turned blue with anger. They glared at Wu Qi angrily, then bowed to Zhang Tingyun at the same time and said, Your Majesty, please understand that this is a deliberate attempt to sow discord. Wu Qi glanced at the man. The fluctuation of star power around him was very obvious, so he should be one of the celestial lords from the lower realm. After panting violently for a while, Lu Bang glared at Wu Qi and growled, King of East Sea, as an important minister of Du, why do you have fiend immortals who practice fiend Dao cultivation techniques under your command? Why do you have so many mountain spirits and water demons in your East Sea army? Are you still a minister of Du? Lu Bang could not stand being accused by Wu Qi again and again. In a moment of desperation, he seized on some of Wu Qi's mistakes and began to counterattack. Zhang Tingyun, Lu Bang, and Lu Buwei stared at Wu Qi, and all of them had the urge to vomit blood. One could be shameless, but not to this extent, could one? The mighty prince of Du had brought countless aquatic demons with him, and they were actually the army rations? Zhang Tingyun nodded and said, Of course, those celestial lords will not attack a single soldier of the East Sea. Wu Qi rose to his feet and looked coldly at Zhang Tingyun. Zhang Tingyun's expression turned very strange. He looked back thoughtfully at Lu Bang. The armies of golden immortal generals, oracles immortals, itinerant cultivators, demons, and ghosts would attack each other, and the one who conquered the enemy's capital first would be the winner. If the army of the East Sea conquered the city of Wanling, Zhang Tingyun would admit defeat. If the army of the Ling dynasty conquered the city of East Sea, Wu Qi would lose everything. Gritting his teeth, Zhang Tingyun was about to speak when Wu Qi stepped in front of Zhang Tingyun and said to Lu Bang with a smile, King of Han Lu Bang, you are too good at currying favor. What is your position in the Ling dynasty now? Those with cultivation bases above the realm of primordial immortals could not do it themselves, but they could bestow magical treasures, talismans, spirit pills, and miraculous medicines at will. Lu Buwei's face was no longer blue but green, while Zhang Tingyun's eyes were twitching with anger. He glared at Lu Buwei, pointed a finger at Wu Qi and snapped, King of East Sea, don't make me look down on you. Wu Qi shuddered and dared not to joke anymore. He turned and pointed a finger at Zhang Tingyun and snapped, Bullshit. Zhang Tingyun, I don't want to waste my breath on you. The army of the East Sea is here today, and we will not let this go easily. Since you are here with your army, why don't we discuss a plan to decide the future of the East Sea and the Ling dynasty? Xiangyu grabbed his helmet and patted his neck. Here's my head. If you need it, King of East Sea, feel free to take it. Lu Bang was about to cry, but Xiangyu refused to let him go. Pointing a finger at Lu Bang, he snapped, Brother Lu Bang, how many years have we not seen each other? How have you been? You and I are brothers, and although there have been some misunderstandings between us, our brotherhood is as precious as gold and jade. If you have the ambition to compete for the position of the human emperor, then you can have my head. Lu Bang's face turned as pale as a green carrot. Before Lu Bang could say anything, Wu Qi had already grabbed Xiangyu from the East Sea Fleet behind him. Smiling, Wu Qi asked Xiangyu, the hegemon king of Western Chu, if Lu Bang wants to fight for the throne of the human emperor, Will you submit to me if I kill you? Smiling, Liu Bang cupped his fist at Wuqi and said, Please excuse me, King of East Sea. I am now the Prime Minister of the Ling Dynasty, in charge of the military affairs and the court affairs. Liu Bang was speechless. Is this really a fresh military food? Lazily glancing at Zhang Tingyun, Wuqi let go of Lu Buwei, whose face had turned green. Smiling, he nodded at Liu Bang and said, King of Han, you are a talented man. Why do you submit to others? If you have the ambition to become the human emperor, do you dare to swear that you will fight for the throne wholeheartedly? I will kill Xiangyu right now, and the army of the East Sea will fully support you in fighting for the throne. The so-called external forces were none other than the Celestial Court and Du. If any immortal of the Celestial Court appeared in the Ling Dynasty's army, the Ling Dynasty would lose. If Du supported even one soldier of the East Sea would lose. Zhang Tingyun nodded with a smile. Then he gave Princess Zhanglu a look and said in a deep voice, In this case, you and I swear that when the Ling Dynasty and the East Sea go to war, only cultivators below the level of primordial can fight. What do you say? The two of them talked for a long time, and discussed many terms and conditions. Finally, they reached an agreement to go to war. As soon as Wu Qi returned to the chariot, he grabbed Ao Buzin and said, You have to work hard to give birth to them. How many can you give birth to when only gold immortal generals are allowed to fight? Beside him, Princess Zhang Li's face darkened. But when they stood together, everyone's eyes would be attracted by Wu Qi. It was a kind of worship that one felt when looking up at the starry sky on a summer night and seeing countless stars, and being shocked by the vastness of heaven and earth and the infinity of the universe. Zhang Tingyun was just an emperor in the mortal world, while Wu Qi was a lofty and unfathomable existence, just like how primitive humans were ignorant of the heavenly Tao, and felt the mysteriousness of the thunderbolts and raindrops, and worshipped them. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi shook his head gently. In a battle between experts of the realm of Tao reasoning and Tao breaking, a slight carelessness could result in the collapse of billions of miles of the void. Years ago, when the almighty experts fought each other, the Pangu continent was smashed into countless pieces during the apocalypse of heaven and earth, forming the outer heavenly realms of today. If the elites of Wu Qi and Zhang Tingyun fought with all their might, as long as the nearly 1,000 celestial lords of the Ling Dynasty rushed out at the same time, the armies of both sides would probably perish together. In front of them, ordinary soldiers could not resist at all. Well, Wu Qi was really shameless, but how could one refute him? Those little demons of the Jindan realm had everything you could think of, including lobsters, abalones, prawns, oysters, and so on. It was absolutely right to say that they were the army's provisions. If you said they were not the army's provisions, but insisted that they were the regular army of the East Sea Army, then, what was that catfish doing? After all the terms were worked out, Wu Qi and Zhang Tingyun announced it in public. Neither of them swore an oath, and it was clear that they both knew the oath was not very reliable. After that, the armies of both sides retreated at the same time, preparing for all kinds of plans before the battle. Zhang Tingyun pondered for a while, then nodded to Wu Qi and said, Very well, very well. Let's set the rules. Ao Buzin stuck out his chest proudly and cried out, Give me enough women, and Lao Tzu will drown the whole Ling Dynasty with an army of dragons as strong as gold immortals. Wu Qi made a fuss and cried out, I let the king of Han be the prime minister? Then the emperor of the Ling Dynasty must be very careful. How could the king of Han be a man who would submit to someone else? Don't be like Prime Minister Lu Buwei, who serves the king of Han, overthrowing the emperor and becoming the emperor himself. Zhang Tingyun narrowed his eyes and gave Princess Zhanglu a look. Just as he was about to order the whole army to attack and destroy the East Sea Army at all costs, a middle-aged man, who was clad in a long green robe and had an ugly face like a crab, suddenly came out from behind the curtain of the chariot. The man whispered a few words into Zhang Tingyun's ear, then gave Wu Qi a deep look, turned around, and retreated behind the curtain. Apart from the fact that they could not attack in person, all other schemes and plots were allowed. For example, it was absolutely not allowed for Princess Zhanglu to curse a general of the Ling Dynasty to death, but it was absolutely allowed for Princess Zhanglu to build an altar and teach a priest of the East Sea to curse a general of the Ling Dynasty to death. Lu Bang was so frightened that his heart skipped a beat. He quickly pointed at Xiang Yu and snapped, "Nonsense! Nonsense!" Wu Qi glanced at Princess Zhonglu and suddenly laughed. "Zixuan, you are the human emperor." Lu Bang was completely defeated. His head drooped and he did not say another word. Staring coldly at Wu Qi, Zhang Tingyun raised his hand and pointed at Wu Qi a few times. "Good, King of East Sea, you have the qualifications to achieve great things with such an ability. Give me the woman beside you. And when I step down from the throne of the human emperor and become the emperor of the celestial court, I will consider letting you take over the throne." Both men were keenly aware of the difference between them. Wu Qi smiled faintly, while Zhang Tingyun's face was wrinkled and very ugly. Facing Wu Qi, Zhang Tingyun felt a sense of inferiority, which made him feel an indescribable anger. "Army provisions?" Looking at the mighty army of East Sea, Zhang Tingyun smiled and said, "King of East Sea, if all the experts from our side join hands and fight a fierce battle here, do you think our army can survive?" In the nearest river, Catfish Flood Dragon was lying lazily on the back of a huge sea turtle, grabbing 2 lobster demons and nibbling them with great relish. Surrounding the turtle were countless lobster demons with some cultivation base, and it looked like they were all the army snacks Catfish Flood Dragon had prepared for herself. Wu Qi raised his brows indifferently and said coolly, "It doesn't matter. If you succeed in sowing discord, you can kill both of them, and I will have a lot of troubles saved. But if you fail, what harm will it bring to me?" Lu Buwei, are you sure you won't make Zhang Tingyun a mere figurehead? I don't think he looks like a human emperor. If you, Lu Buwei, dare to kill him and ascend the throne yourself, I, Wu Qi, swear that the army of East Sea will definitely help you put down the resistance of Ling Dynasty. Both sides would use all the forces they had now as the standard, and no external forces would be allowed to interfere. In terms of height, Wu Qi was a little shorter than Zhang Tingyun. And in terms of appearance, Zhang Tingyun's face was almost a work of art carved from jade, and Wu Qi was even inferior to him. In terms of bearing, Zhang Tingyun had all the qualities that an emperor should have, such as a domineering, heroic spirit, awe-inspiring air, and so on. He even looked so elegant, handsome, and elegant. Staring coldly at Lu Bang, Wu Qi patted Xiang Yu's shoulder and said with a cold grin, "Xiang Yu is my captive. Don't tell me I can't order him to march and fight? As for those water spirits and water monsters..." Lowering his head to look at the seemingly endless army of East Sea and the few rivers near and far, Wu Qi nodded at Lu Bang with a smile and said, "They are the army's rations. They are the fresh rations brought by the East Sea army. Is that a problem for you?" Princess Zhonglu rolled her eyes at Wu Qi. Gently stroking her lower abdomen with both hands, she said slowly, "If this child's father dares to exchange me for anything, I'll strangle him to death right now, and then drag his father to death with me." Thinking of those celestial lords just now, Wu Qi smiled and said, "If someone's cultivation base has not reached the state of primordial, but they..." Zhang Tingyun sneered. Suppressing the murderous intent in his heart when he heard Wu Qi's words, he waved his hand gently and said, "How can I not know that this is a trick of others? Just work for the Ling Dynasty loyally, and there will be benefits for both of you in the future." Laughing coldly, Zhang Tingyun raised his head proudly and said to Wu Qi, "The King of East Sea has overestimated me." Chapter 950. In the city of East Sea, Wu Qi sat cross-legged in a secret chamber with his nascent divinity unleashed, controlling the blood-draining celestial fiends to move around. Great Wu's war against the outside world had reached a climax. More and more soldiers had joined the army, more and more mountain spirits and water monsters had joined the army, and more immortal sects and itinerant cultivators had joined Great Wu, becoming disciples of the imperial advisor. After releasing Swearin Feng, who had been captured alive, and quickly breaking away from contact with New Yu, Great Wu had been fighting on both the eastern and western fronts. Almost every day, several mortal kingdoms from outer heavenly realms were annexed by Great Wu. At the behest of the blood-draining celestial fiends, the emperors of those kingdoms were taken back to Great Wu's capital city, and Wu Tianming cut off their heads with his own hands. As Wu Qi had expected, the emperor aura in those emperors had all fused into Wu Tianming's body. The purple emperor aura in Wu Tianming's body shaped like a flood dragon, had grown stronger and clearer. The 10-foot-long purple flood dragon had gradually grown eyes and scales, and even its thin whiskers could be seen clearly. Nuyu was furious about Feng's capture, and the emperor even ordered an army to hunt down Great Wu. But Diyu began to launch a tentative attack on Nuyu. Emperor Haozuan personally led a large army, divided into 36 armies, and attacked Nuyu's border. Among Emperor Haozuan's army were ancient immortals and ancient deities from Xianyuan Peak, as well as a large number of divine beasts and birds in human form. Nuyu was shocked, and the emperor could only mobilize all his armies to fight against Diyu. He could no longer pay attention to Great Wu. Emperor Haozuan launched an attack on Nuyu from the north, while in the southern region of Diyu, some of the deities serving the Yan Emperor, Shenno, had led a large army. An army composed of countless strange humans poured out of the Great Marsh in the south and stabbed Nuyu in the back. Now Nuyu was in for a good time. Diyu began to confront Nuyu head-on. Wuqi's army in the East Sea began to compete with the Ling dynasty, and Gao's army in the West seemed to have encountered a formidable enemy. He had sent a few blood-draining celestial fiends there to gather information, and if possible, he would secretly help Gao kill a few of his opponents in secret. It would not be a bad idea to kill a few of Gao's opponents. The war had officially broken out on Penghu continent, and the major powers in the north, south, east, and west were engaged in a chaotic battle. Overall, it seemed that Diyu still had the upper hand. At the very least, Diyu did not seem to be at a disadvantage in the three-way battle. However, no one knew how long this situation would last. A wisp of Wuqi's nascent divinity transformed into a tiny electric pigeon, hovering in midair and watching the East Sea County, attacking the cities of the Ling dynasty in the distance. However, the fist-sized electric pigeon was also a kind of divine bird, one of the lesser divine birds. It was born with the ability to control thunder and lightning, and could fly at an incredible speed. The reason why Wuqi transformed his nascent divinity into an electric pigeon was to make it easier for him to escape. After all, the overall strength of the Ling dynasty was extremely strong, and he did not want to lose a wisp of his divine will for no reason if it was discovered by someone. Below Wuqi, leading an army of 300,000 to attack the city ahead, was Ying Ziying, the last emperor of Daqin. Dozens of Daqin's descendants were gathered around him. They all possessed the overall strength of gold immortals, which was in line with the agreement drawn up by Wuqi and Zhang Tingyun. Arrows were falling like rain, blades and spears were forming a forest, and the soldiers of the East Sea County were approaching the city in a neat phalanx with heavy shields on their heads. Pushed by countless soldiers, hundreds of large battle machines made by the disciples of Mo School approached the city wall. When they were still 20 miles away from the city wall, they stopped. Their thick legs were lowered from around the battle machines, piercing deep into the ground. A whistle rang out, and countless thumb-sized iron balls shot out from the war machines like thunderbolts, smashing onto the city wall like a heavy rain. The ground was shaking, and the deafening booms made people lose their footing, while the bright light made people's eyes hurt. These iron balls were carefully mixed by the disciples of Mo sect, and each of them contained the essence of a heavenly thunder. Countless iron balls bombarded the wall in front of them, and the defense of the city was greatly weakened by the bombardment of the iron balls. After that, a series of clicking noises could be heard coming from the war machines, as thousands of spears, each as thick as a bowl, shot out with a deep, muffled whistle, thrusting heavily into the city wall in the distance. At the same time, the tails of these spears began to spin rapidly, from which numerous yellow talismans, each about 10 feet wide and several hundred feet long, dangled down. These talismans were made using fine yellow satin, and on their surfaces, vermilion runes that looked like swimming dragons could be clearly seen. These talismans were made by the disciples of Giguzi, the Gigu Valley's disciples. They were the mountain-splitting talismans, which could restrain the natural energy in the underground energy veins and interfere with the flow of the underground energy veins. As soon as the spears pierced into the city wall, the talismans unfolded, releasing a jarring red light that transformed into countless streams of light, seeping into the city wall and drilling into the ground. A loud boom rang out, as the city wall crumbled abruptly, and an yellow earth energy rushed up into the sky. Several thousand soldiers who guarded the city were thrown into midair by the earth energy, howling and wailing. Their bodies were shredded by the earth energy, and they were killed on the spot. The East Sea army cheered. Ing Ziying raised the spear in his hand and pointed it forward. Immediately, all the 300,000 soldiers of the East Sea army, except for 100,000 soldiers who were left in reserve, immediately set off and marched into the city in an offensive formation. Along the way, Ing Ziying had broken through the defense of the city with the talismans, then launched a surprise attack with the superior force of the army, looting the people and treasures in the city. With this method, Ing Ziying had conquered 2 military towns of the Ling dynasty, and this was the first major city of the Ling dynasty that he had ever encountered. Although the Ling dynasty had a large number of soldiers, the Ling dynasty also had a great number of cities and military towns that needed to be defended. So if a major city of the Ling dynasty could be defended by several tens of thousands of soldiers, it would already be considered an incredible city. The city before him had only 10,000 soldiers, and among them, 4 to 5,000 were killed by the earth energy that soared up when the city wall crumbled. Currently, the remaining soldiers made up less than 2 to 3% of Ing Ziying's army. Wu Qi bowed his head and gave the major city of the Ling dynasty a look, where the city wall had crumbled, then looked into the distance. Across the long battlefront, the armies of the East Sea army had divided themselves into over 100 attacking points to attack the Ling dynasty. In each of these attacking points, there were a few small armies like Ing Ziying's marching side by side. These over 100 attacking points were in coordination with each other from a distance. More or less, they still formed the 7 armies of the East Sea Alliance, which were divided into 3 main attacking forces. None of this required Wu Qi to rack his brain. The elites of the 6 dynasties knew how to fight a war, how to cooperate with each other, and how to suppress the enemy with a tide-like offensive, making it impossible for the enemy to breathe or fight back. In the hands of this group of freaks, a bloody war had become an art. Compared to this group of freaks from the 6 dynasties, it was true that the Ling dynasty had countless fierce generals, but it seemed that their combat attainments were not much better than the generals of Du Alliance. These generals of the Ling dynasty were simple-minded. The most common tactic they used was to open the city gates and fight head-on with the East Sea army. But with experts in the art of war such as Sun Bin and Pang Wan, it would be fine if these generals of the Ling dynasty just stayed in the city and waited to be attacked. But once they opened the city gates and fought the East Sea army in the field, they would not even know how they died. In a forest 1,000 miles away, a column of flame soared into the sky. Wu Qi was flying high up in the sky and looking into the distance. Over there, an army under the command of a great-grandson of Pang Wan had just ambushed the 20,000 soldiers of the Ling dynasty by taking advantage of the terrain. He did not even attack, but directly broke through the earth's crust and brought down the raging underground fire, burning the 20,000 soldiers of the Ling dynasty. Only the few generals who led the army escaped, but they were immediately surrounded and hacked to death by the superior forces of the East Sea army. Wu Qi could not help but laugh. It seemed that the Ling dynasty was used to having a smooth life in outer heavenly realms, and they did not know how to fight a war at all. Even as he was feeling complacent, Ing Ziying suddenly gave a muffled snort down below, followed by the shrill cries of countless soldiers of the East Sea army. When Wu Qi looked down in horror, he saw a Taoist with disheveled hair, clad in a Taoist robe made of rags, and holding an iron gourd in his hand. He was chasing after the 200,000 soldiers of the East Sea army and attacking them. Ing Ziying and the many generals around him were bleeding profusely, throwing away their helmets and armors and fleeing to the rear with the army. A great plume of black smoke was spraying out of the 3-foot-tall iron gourd in the Taoist's hand. Countless thumb-sized, pitch-black wasps that looked like they were forged from steel were flying all over the sky, and when they caught an East Sea army soldier, they would stab him with a needle. It was unknown what kind of special wasps these wasps were, but as the soldiers of the East Sea army had cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture to the realm of heaven immortal, their fleshly bodies were so strong that they could withstand thunderbolts. However, the poisonous stingers of the wasps could easily stab into their bodies, and when the poisonous gas flared up, they would turn into fist-sized pustules, with yellow and green liquid oozing out of them. There were 5,000 oracles in the army of 300,000 soldiers. When they saw that the wasps unleashed by the Taoist were so vicious, all 5,000 oracles of the East Sea flew up into the sky at the same time and sprinkled numerous spirit talismans down. Some of them even took out fist-sized jars and sprayed out a dark medicinal liquid that came with a pungent smell of herbs, covering every soldier of the East Sea army. When the medicinal liquid touched the soldiers, sizzling noises could be heard. Instead of healing, the wounds on their bodies were rapidly expanding and rotting. The oracles were startled and hastily stopped their work of sprinkling the medicinal liquid to detoxify the soldiers. On Ing Ziying's forehead, there were 3 pustules the size of fists, dripping with pus, which made him unable to see where he was going. Then he slammed his head into a tree. Nevertheless, as he had a strong fleshly body, the tree was smashed to pieces by him. Like a wild boar that had gone mad, he led the several 100,000 soldiers of the East Sea and fled at top speed towards the rear. After chasing for a while, the Taoist retracted the wasps. With a complacent smile on his face, he turned to the fleeing soldiers of the East Sea and said, "I'm Taoist B, an idler from Mount Guyin. The human Emperor Du is a tyrannical man, and I've followed the will of heaven and descended the mountain to help the sacred emperor of the Ling dynasty unify the human race. This is a deed of great merit. I'll spare your lives today, but if you dare to invade again, don't blame me for being merciless." Wuxia nearly spat out a thunderbolt and killed this Taoist B, who only possessed the cultivation base of 16th tier gold immortal. Why did this scene sound so familiar? When Wuxia was reading some idle books, didn't those Taoists in the investiture of the gods use the same tone? You bastards! Do you really want to play this game on Pangu continent? Idlers from outside? Does this count as the intervention of an external power? After a brief moment of pondering, Wuxia shook his head helplessly. The Taoist B was participating in the war as an individual, so how could he be considered as an external power? He frowned in distress. This is going to be a big problem. Chapter 951. But, for the people on Pangu continent, they were a very powerful enemy. Standing off to the side, Catfish Flood Dragon smacked her lips with saliva dripping down from the corner of her mouth. She turned her head away from B and said, lest she could not help but swallow him and break the agreement between the East Sea and the Ling dynasty. Is there anyone in Wuna City who dares to fight me? Ing Ziying's army was only one of the armies defeated by Taoist B. Dozens of other armies had encountered itinerant immortals who called themselves idlers like Taoist B. Relying on all kinds of strange poisons, some mystic divine abilities, or some strange magical treasures, they had defeated 47 armies of the East Sea in a row. Nearly 30,000 soldiers were killed, and 80% of the rest were severely wounded. Since some so-called idlers had joined the Ling dynasty, more and more itinerant immortals who were proficient in all kinds of strange and bizarre means would join them. It was true that the East Sea had many soldiers and generals, but because of the agreement between the two sides, no one above the realm of primordial could join them. Therefore, ordinary soldiers of the East Sea would suffer a great loss if they encountered these itinerant immortals. Of the dozens of soldiers lying in the Great Hall, only one was wounded by Taoist B, and the rest were wounded by other itinerant immortals. Some of them were festering all over, some had their souls wounded, some were blind, and some were as stiff as zombies. All kinds of strange injuries could not be treated by the oracles of the East Sea, so they could only be sent here for Princess Zhonglu to think of a solution. No wonder the oracles in the front line treated the wounded soldiers with antidotes they had concocted in advance, which made their injuries worse. The antidotes did remove some of the toxins in the mixed venom, but instead, they mutated with other ingredients into a more vicious poison, causing the soldiers to suffer more serious injuries. Fortunately, Princess Zhonglu had thoroughly studied Wu Qi's pill manual, and Wu Qi had taught Princess Zhonglu many of the methods of Elder Yuan Ling in her previous life. Otherwise, these strange injuries would not have been healed. Many of her injuries were related to some unique poisons in the chaos, and some were the killing curses passed down by the Chaos Fiend God. If Princess Zhonglu had only inherited the ancient Tao of divinity, she wouldn't have been able to deal with those incredible powers and secret techniques of the Chaos Fiend God. A few black-robed oracles of the East Sea walked out. They held bone staffs in their hands and looked at the wasp Dao. After reciting a few spells, they pointed their bone staffs at the wasp Dao. It was the same for the other 47 armies who had suffered a setback. The individual immortals who went to battle were far weaker than the generals who led the armies. If they fought with their real cultivation bases, the generals of the East Sea could easily kill them. But with the help of some strange poisons, strange curses, and bizarre magical treasures, they managed to defeat over 40 armies of the East Sea and make them flee with their tails between their legs. Holding Princess Zhonglu in his arms, Wuxia was also thinking about how to continue the war. After the incident with the wasp Dao, Wuxia suddenly realized that the foundation of the East Sea was not strong enough. Facing the various tricks of the Ling dynasty, if the East Sea could only be beaten passively, it would be too disadvantageous for them. As the rotting energy bees came from the chaos, their poisons were mixed with a wisp of chaos energy, which made the poison-expelling curse of the Directorate of Celestials ineffective. That was why the army of 300,000 soldiers led by Ying Ziying suffered a crushing defeat, with over 200,000 soldiers severely wounded. Although formidable creatures like the Chaos Fiend God were born in the chaos, there were also all kinds of strange creatures who were much weaker than the Chaos Fiend God. For example, the rotting energy bees were one of them. In the chaos, they were born with the cultivation base of heaven immortals, but they were the weakest existences. As they only possessed the cultivation base of gold immortals when they reached adulthood, they were often the prey of other formidable creatures. The atmosphere in the Great Assembly Hall was oppressive. The higher-ups of the East Sea were frowning, trying to come up with a way to break out of this predicament. The sound of battle broke out in all directions, as a dozen itinerant immortals who had joined the Ling dynasty had blocked the city gate of Zhendong City. Zhendong City was the easternmost city within the East Sea's sphere of influence, and the actual headquarters of the East Sea Army. After a brief moment of pondering, Princess Zhonglu, who had thoroughly studied all the alchemy manuals in Wuqi's previous life, began to recite the names of a large number of herbs in a low voice. The priestess standing next to her quickly wrote down the names of the herbs, and the method of decocting them on a jade slip, preparing to brew a large number of medicinal decoctions to treat these soldiers. The foundation of the East Sea Army was still too weak, and they lacked talents who were proficient in all kinds of strange arts. The Celestial Court, on the other hand, had been operating in outer heavenly realms for countless years, and had spread their Dao League to countless itinerant immortals who were proficient in all kinds of strange arts. As long as they needed it, they could easily mobilize as many itinerant immortals as individuals to join the Ling dynasty. Princess Zhonglu was standing next to a soldier who had been stung by a hornet from Taoist bee, together with a few young ladies dressed in the black robes of priestesses. The soldier was barely conscious, but he was so feverish that if an egg was placed on him, it would be cooked in just a few seconds. His body was densely covered with pustules the size of fists, from which pus kept dripping down, leaving long, sticky threads in the air. Taoist bee was still dressed as before, with 3,000 soldiers standing in a straight line behind him. Holding the iron gourd in his hand, he stared proudly at the city gate and cried out, "I'm Taoist bee from Mount Guin. May I ask, which fellow Taoist from the East Sea dares to fight me?" Shaking his thighs proudly, Taoist bee smiled and said, "Seniors of the realm of Primordial, don't worry. According to the agreement between the Ling dynasty and the East Sea, you can only watch from the sidelines, and you must never fight." The hornets controlled by Taoist bee must have obtained the queen of an energy-rotting wasp, and then mixed her blood with some poisonous insects from Pangu world, thus producing this kind of hornet with complex and potent toxicity. From the needles, Princess Zhonglu could smell the scent of 36 different poisonous plants. When these things were mixed together and fed to the poisonous creatures, it would make the toxicity of the poisonous creatures even harder to deal with. One by one, the soldiers looked at the needles and came up with a treatment method for them. Quickly, a few female oracles recorded the treatment method given by Princess Zhonglu on jade slips, then handed them to the generals of the 6 dynasties who were waiting nearby to quickly use them to treat the soldiers. While Princess Zhonglu was treating the soldiers, news came that the wounded soldiers had begun to die in large numbers, and some soldiers who were cursed by the zombie curse had begun to shed their skin and turn into black-haired zombies, wreaking havoc everywhere. Suddenly, a ghostly howl rang out, and a large sheet of light that looked like a white lotus suddenly emerged around Taoist B. The curse cast by the oracles of the East Sea was turned into nothingness by the white light, and did not hurt even a single hair of Taoist B's. Taoist B laughed complacently. Pointing at the top of the city wall, he scolded, "What do you demons know? I have a jade purity talisman personally given to me by His Majesty, which makes me impervious to all evils and spells. With your cultivation base of gold immortals, how could you possibly hurt me?" There was no record about the zombie curse in Diyu's Directorate of Celestials. Only Princess Zhongli knew that although the zombie curse was brutal, it could be easily cured by picking 3 of the most common rue leaves and carving a talisman on them. Although it looks simple, this easy and simple treatment method was discovered in the ancient times with the sacrifice of countless people. Looking at the many emperors and ministers of 6 dynasties in the Great Hall, Princess Zhongli shook her head and said, "It's still unknown whether this 6 Harmonies body cleansing soup is effective or not. Stop attacking now, and pay attention to guarding all the military towns, cities, and strategic passes. We can't let Ling Dynasty take the opportunity to take advantage of us. Curse him to death." Wuxia snorted coldly. Taking Taoist B as an example, in terms of actual cultivation base, Ying could easily poke holes all over his body with a single spear. However, just by relying on the hybrid of yuan rotting bees and other poisonous creatures, the army of several hundreds of thousands of soldiers led by Ying was completely routed and suffered a great number of casualties. For example, there was a soldier lying on a wooden platform, his body twitching. His skin was dry and cracked like cowhide, and his muscles had turned black like necrosis. He was struck by the zombie curse of a certain chaos fiend god, Lord Zombie, who had fallen countless years ago. It was a ferocious curse that could forcibly turn a living man into a bloodthirsty zombie that could fly in the sky and burrow into the ground. Before Taoist B's voice could fade away, tens of teams of Ling Dynasty came rushing towards them. Each team had a total of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers, and the leader of each team was a Taoist dressed in a strange outfit. Shouting and yelling, they were approaching East Suppression City at top speed. A wooden platform, about half the height of a man, was placed in a straight line in the middle of the Great Assembly Hall. Several dozens of burly men were lying on the platform, their lower bodies wrapped in underpants. All of them had strange injuries on their bodies. Blood and pus were dripping all over the ground, and a foul stench was so strong that no one in the hall could open their eyes. Wuqi's face turned extremely unsightly when he was challenged by someone at the city gate. Suddenly, a military officer standing next to Huang Liang let out a loud cry and sprung up into the air, swinging his sword and slashing it towards Taoist B. This military officer possessed the cultivation base of 3 Penga Heaven Realm, and in terms of overall strength, he could absolutely suppress Taoist B. But as soon as he sprung up into the air, a dark shadow flashed by. The military officer shrieked miserably, covered his mouth with both hands and ran back. After a few steps, he tilted his body and fell heavily to the ground. Wuqi saw clearly that a wasp had flown into the military officer's wide-open mouth and stabbed the tip of his tongue. The tip of the tongue was very close to the brain, and the poison spread very quickly in this part of the military officer's body. The hall fell into a dead silence. Suddenly, a plume of dark smoke rose from the ground, and Wuqi walked out of it with a frown on his face. When she saw that Wuqi had come alone, Princess Zhongli hurriedly came up to him and explained the situation to him in a low voice. One after another, the higher-ups of East Sea bowed to Wuqi. Their brows were knitted tightly, as they could not think of any solution to the situation. The silver needle pierced into the soldier's body and gently twisted it. When Princess Zhongli pulled it out, it was already covered with a faint layer of mist that was intertwined with black and gray. She put the needle under her nose and sniffed it carefully, causing Princess Zhongli's face to turn gloomy. I have to think of a way to reverse the unfavorable situation. Perhaps I should go to outer heavenly realms and recruit a group of itinerant immortals? But I'm not Shin Gongbao in the investiture of the gods, A monster who can make people work for me wholeheartedly just by calling me fellow Taoist. Just as he was worrying, a soldier rushed in and reported loudly, "Report! A cultivator who calls himself Taoist B is at the east gate with 3,000 soldiers, asking for a fight." Wuxia was so angry that he laughed. "You're just a little gold immortal. And yet you dare to bully me?" With a cold snort, Wuxia glanced at the higher-ups of East Sea. In the blink of an eye, a large group of people arrived at the East Gate Tower with countless guards, looking down at Taoist B, who was engaged in a fierce battle outside the city. Chapter 952. Treasure Rise and Fall. A Taoist in a black robe triumphantly held up a seemingly tattered wooden stake with 3 metal rings on it. In front of him lay a general of the East Sea, who was twitching and unable to move, laughing almost madly. The Taoist cultivation base was only a 19th tier heaven immortal, but the general of the East Sea in front of him had the cultivation base of a 1st star realm of 2nd Pango heaven. As soon as the general of the East Sea joined the battle, the Taoist immediately produced the 3-foot-long wooden stake in his hand, which transformed into a huge dark cloud and soared into the sky. Looming over the general of the East Sea, the 3 metal rings emitted an eerie white light, wrapped around the general's head, neck, and waist and shrunk inwards. That was what happened. Stepping on the head of the general of the East Sea, the old Taoist, who called himself Taoist Three Rings, raised the wooden stake in his hand and laughed. "Is there anyone in the East Sea who dares to fight me? In the vast East Sea, with its great reputation and countless elite soldiers, is there no one who dares to fight me?" Wuqi's face turned green. This was the first time he had suffered such a setback since he came to Pangu continent. Right under his nose, a dozen itinerant immortals, the strongest of whom was only a 9th tier gold immortal, and the weakest was only a 25th tier heaven immortal, had defeated 108 generals of the East Sea in a row, relying on some strange magical treasures, magical techniques, and evil poisons. The 2nd Pango Heaven general who had just been knocked down was Huang Liang's deputy, but he was still vulnerable to the 3-ring Taoist. After a long silence, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Taoist 3 Rings, release the general of the East Sea, and I'll give you immortal stones and spirit herbs according to the price we offered just now." Laughing strangely, Taoist 3 Rings kicked the general of the East Sea hundreds of feet away, causing him to roll dozens of times on the ground. A few soldiers of the East Sea picked up the general, who was twitching all over, and fled back to Zhendong City with their tails between their legs. After losing 108 battles in a row, the morale of the East Sea County had fallen to 0. If this went on, there was no need for them to fight the Ling dynasty any longer, and they could just admit defeat. With a flick of his hand, Taoist 3 Rings threw a storage bag off the city wall. Complacently he sucked the bag into his hand, cupped his fist at Wu Qi, and said, "You are indeed generous, King of East Sea. I can't believe you are willing to sacrifice so much for the sake of a defeated general. Hee, is there any hero in the East Sea who dares to fight me?" Wu Qi pondered for a moment, then waved his hand and hung a huge golden plaque over the city gate. The words "Fight again in 7 days" came into view. Outside the city, Taoist Feng, Taoist 3 Rings, and the other itinerant immortals burst out laughing. With their cultivation base, they had forced all the primordial experts in the city to stay away from the East Sea, and had wounded 108 generals of the East Sea in front of so many primordial experts. They had even forced Wu Qi to hang up the no-fight sign, and fight again 7 days later. How great was the merit they had achieved! When Zhang Tingyun really ascended to the throne of the sacred emperor of the human race, with this contribution alone, he would surely get a good position in the celestial court. A dozen Taoists were laughing outside the city. That night, they had set up camp outside the city gate. The soldiers of the Ling dynasty had lit up bonfires and roasted all kinds of game they had hunted. The aroma of wine and meat wafted far away, and the sound of laughter made the faces of the soldiers of the East Sea on the city wall turn extremely unsightly. In the great assembly hall, the high-ranking officials of the East Sea looked at each other worriedly. Those Taoists were not very strong, and their cultivation base was not very high. But the magical treasures, mystic arts, and poisons they used were too bizarre, and each of them was a powerful object with a long history. If any of the high-ranking officials of the East Sea present were to strike, they could easily be killed by any one of them. But what would be the consequences if a primordial expert attacked? The consequence was that the primordial experts of the Ling dynasty would retaliate without any scruples. It was like two nuclear powers on Earth throwing nuclear warheads at each other. And in the end, they would all be finished together. The cultivation base of the soldiers on both sides was above the level of heaven immortals, and the limit they could withstand was a fight between gold immortals. The energy ripples emitted when two gold immortals fought each other were not something the soldiers could withstand. If it were a battle between primordial immortals, it was possible that the soldiers of both sides would be wiped out with just a single exchange of blows. That was not an outcome that anyone wanted. So even though there were so many primordial experts in the East Sea, the gate was blocked by a dozen gold immortals and heaven immortals. Sitting on the throne, Wuxia was silent for a long time. Then he pulled out the blood centipede sword and wiped it clean. After that, Wuxia threw the sword to Bai Wuyong, who stood next to Baiqi and was Baiqi's proudest great-grandson Bai Wuyong. The blood centipede sword, an innate spirit artifact, is extremely sharp. Bai Wuyong, use it to kill all the Taoists outside the city in 7 days. There was a murderous intent in Wuqi's words that sent a chill down everyone's spine. Everyone nodded silently. This was the best outcome. Yingzheng glanced at Wuqi, then at the high-ranking officials of the East Sea present. Then he slapped his head. Amidst the swirling dark clouds, the cauldron of Yu, the item of virtue he had used in Meng Mountains, flew out. Yingzheng handed the cauldron of Yu to his grandson, Yingzishan, the youngest son of Fusu, the crown prince of Great Qin, and said, "Take this cauldron. 7 days from now, you'll represent Great Qin in the battle." One after another, the high-ranking officials of the 6 states handed their personal treasures to their juniors. The fact that Wuqi had given the blood centipede sword to Bai Wuyong showed Wuqi's attitude. With Wuqi's current status, it was impossible for him to take back what he had given away. In other words, this innate spirit artifact was given to Bai Wuyong. He wanted a great victory at all costs. Since Wuqi had put in so much effort, what else could the others say? If they watched the East Sea be defeated, not only would the interests of the 6 states suffer a great loss, they would also lose face. The Great Hall was filled with dazzling lights. The emperors and ministers of the 6 states had brought out all their treasures. But there were only about 100 emperors and ministers of the 6 states with extraordinary treasures, which could only equip about 100 juniors. The outcome of the battle in 7 days was still unknown, and it was a little difficult for them to resist the Ling dynasty, with just 100 extraordinary treasures. Wuqi tapped lightly on the table in front of him. After pondering for a long time, he nodded slowly and said, "Let's hold on for a while. I'll think of a way to solve this problem. In front of us, the people of the Ling dynasty cannot be complacent." The people exchanged a glance and nodded slowly at the same time. Just then, a beam of golden light descended from the sky, suddenly piercing through the layers of restrictive spells in East Suppression City, and falling straight in front of the assembly hall. A deep voice rang out. "What troubles do you have? Can you tell me? I'm Reverend Flysoul, an itinerant cultivator from Mount Jiuyao. Now, following the will of heaven, I've come to seek refuge in the East Sea and wipe out the heaven-defying Ling dynasty." Everyone was taken aback, and Chi-Chi turned to look at the entrance of the hall. A Taoist, who was 10 feet tall and 6 feet wide on his shoulders, was standing in front of the main hall. His entire body was covered with bulging muscles, and his skin was pitch black like an iron ingot. He carried 2 huge iron hammers on his back, and 8 lines of blood-red talismans were stuck on the surface of the black hammers. An immense murderous aura was constantly emanating from the hammers, causing the hearts of all the people in the main hall to skip a beat. Yingzheng sneered and said, "Taoist, are you telling the truth?" "Believe it or not," said Reverend Flysoul in a lukewarm tone. "I'm not here to risk my life for the East Sea. I'm just following the decree of a senior, to make things difficult for the Ling dynasty. It's just that it's not convenient for me to find the Ling dynasty directly, so I'm just using the East Sea as a cover." Before his words could fade away, another beam of green light descended from the sky. A skinny Taoist, clad in a long green robe and shrouded in green mist, with his face as green as spinach, landed in front of the hall. He cupped his fist and bowed to Reverend Flysoul in a gloomy manner and said, "Fellow Taoist Flysoul, I didn't expect you to be here as well." Reverend Flysoul gave the green-clothed Taoist a look and said with surprise, "Immortaling, I didn't expect you to be on the same side as me." Immortaling said in a gloomy manner, "Likewise. I'm here following the decree of a senior to make things difficult for the Ling dynasty, and the East Sea has given us a good excuse." Inside the hall, the higher-ups of the East Sea did not make a sound. The emperors and ministers of the 6 states could not figure out the origins of these two people, but Wuxia revealed a mysterious smile. He and Princess Zhongli looked at each other. Both of them had a feeling that this must be the case. The Holy Alliance formed by the 18 sages would not sit idly by and watch the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League do as they please. They would definitely cause trouble for the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. Perhaps the 18 sages were plotting how to deal with the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, but this did not stop them from sending some itinerant immortals who were related to them to make trouble for the Ling dynasty. After all, the 18 sages were supreme beings of the Tao integration stage. Even if they didn't establish their own sects and recruit disciples, they would have formed many relationships over the years. These itinerant immortals must have been indebted to them in the past. Or perhaps, they were simply servants that they had raised to run errands for them. With a bright smile on his face, Wuxia rose to his feet and courteously greeted the 2 Taoists. "Fellow Taoists, it is my honor to have you help the East Sea so righteously. Someone set up a banquet. Let's drink to our heart's content and welcome our fellow Taoists." Grabbing Reverend Flysoul and Immortal Ying's hands, Wuxia dragged them into the hall. At first, Reverend Flysoul and Immortal Ying shook their wrists, trying to shake off Wuqia's hand. But how could they shake off Wuqia's strength? He chuckled as he pulled the 2 of them to the main hall and forced them to sit down on their seats. The others had also understood the purpose of Wuqia's visit. Intentionally or unintentionally, the group of higher-ups unleashed their auras. Reverend Flysoul and Immortal Ying, who were a little haughty just a moment ago, suddenly stiffened. Heavens above, how could there be so many primordial experts in the East Sea? And it was obvious that a few of them were cultivating the immortal magic of the Tao League. Was the East Sea a power of the human race or the Tao League? Reverend Flysoul and Immortal Ying's attitude immediately became much more humble. Smiling, they cupped their fists and greeted Wuxia, their eyes blinking as they looked around in amazement at the civil and military officials of the East Sea, whose cultivation base was much higher than theirs. Beams of light fell from the sky one after another. In just over 2 hours, nearly 100 odd-looking itinerant immortals had come to the East Sea. These itinerant immortals were originally very arrogant, but after Wuxia gave them a little show of strength, they all became very humble. After that, Wuxia deliberately tried to win them over with enthusiasm, and soon, it was a lively scene where the guests and the hosts were enjoying themselves. 7 days later, a horn rang out outside Jindong City, and the itinerant immortals of the Ling dynasty were ready to fight again. During these 7 days, more than 3,000 itinerant immortals had come to Jindong City to join the army of the East Sea. Chapter 953. On the tower, the leaders of the East Sea stood in a straight line, staring coldly down at Taoist Three Rings. Taoist Three Rings raised the wooden stake in his hand triumphantly, laughed and said, "King of East Sea, do you still have any elite soldiers under your command who dare to fight me? If no one can defeat me and my fellow Taoists this time, no wonder we're going to attack the city." Behind Taoist Three Rings stood more than 200 itinerant immortals in strange attire. Each of them had brought 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers with them, and on the east side of Jindong City, they had gathered 1,000,000 soldiers as well. If they attacked the city, it would be more than enough when Wuxia and the others could not join in the battle. Upon hearing Taoist Three Rings' challenge, these Taoists burst into laughter at the same time. First, they had defeated 108 generals of the East Sea in a row, which had greatly damaged the morale of the East Sea's army, greatly reducing the difficulty of attacking the city. As Taoist Three Rings had said, these Taoists had come to a decision that today was the best time to attack the city. The soldiers of the East Sea had lost their will to fight, And if Wuxia and the others could not join in the battle, it would be a piece of cake to break through Zhendong City. With a sneer, Wuxia looked at Bai Wuyong, who was standing next to Baiqi, and said, "Kill him." Bai Wuyong let out a loud cry and leaped up from the top of the city wall, clutching the blood centipede sword and swinging it down in a beam of sword light. Daoist Three Rings was shocked. Hastily, he cast out his wooden stake and enveloped Bai Wuyong with a dark mist. 3 metal rings glowed with a strong white light as they circled around Bai Wuyong's head, neck and waist. The blood centipede sword circled around him, and a very thin sheet of blood-red light tore through the void. A hissing sound rang out as the 3 metal rings were cut into 6 pieces and fell to the ground. Daoist Three Rings howled miserably as filthy blood sprayed out of his 7 apertures. He staggered backward and fled in a panic, crying out, "Help my fellow Daoists." After losing the magic treasure that he relied on, the 3-ring Daoist was even more timid than an ordinary cultivator. Bai Wuyong looked at the fleeing Daoist 3-ringed in front of him, and rushed to his back with a single step. The blood centipede sword mercilessly swept across Daoist 3-ring's body, and cut him in half. The laughter of the itinerant immortals of the Ling dynasty suddenly stopped. They stared blankly at the blood centipede sword in Bai Wuyong's hand, and a look of greed came over their faces at the same time. A primordial spiritual weapon. They recognized that it was a primordial spiritual weapon. If they could kill Bai Wuyong and get their hands on this sword, how great would that be? Although these loose immortals had their own trump cards, not all of them had a magic treasure that they could use easily. Immediately, a Daoist in a crimson robe flew out and shouted sternly, "How dare you kill my best friend? Fellow Daoist Three-Ring's spirit is not far away. Watch me avenge you." The Daoist raised his hands and rubbed them together. A great plume of fire sprayed out like a meteor shower. Countless dazzling red fireballs trailed behind them as they smashed toward Bai Wuyong. Bai Wuyong swung his sword and retreated hastily. The generals of the East Sea had witnessed the means of this red-robed Daoist a few days ago. The flames he sprayed were extremely strange and vicious. Once attached to the body, they would not burn the skin, flesh and bones, but only hurt the soul and blood essence. 7 days ago, the general of the East Sea who fought with him was accidentally attached to the body of the red-robed Daoist. He was burned from the 3 stars realm of the second Pengu heaven to the point of losing his blood essence, and falling back 3 major realms to the level of the 6 stars realm. On top of that, after he was possessed by the flame, his soul would be surrounded and burned by it, and he would lose control of his fleshly body, allowing anyone to do whatever they wanted to him. As a result, the general just stood stiffly on the battlefield. Using a shabby flying sword, the Daoist hacked and hacked at the general for a full 2 hours, and finally injured both of the general's eyes. Wuxia was forced to admit defeat, and the general was rescued and brought back to East Suppression City. If the red-robed Daoist could get his hands on the blood centipede sword, with the strange power of his flames, he could kill his enemy with a single strike. He would not be in such an awkward situation as 7 days ago, when he had to work hard for 2 hours to injure his enemy's eyes, the most vulnerable part of his body. He waved the blood centipede sword and sent out a great sheet of blood-red light, barely blocking the countless fireballs that came at him. The red-robed Daoist figure flickered like a ghost in the fireballs. Bai Wuyong had no other divine abilities except for his mighty physical strength. He could not even control the blood centipede sword to fight back, so he could only passively fend off the red-robed Daoist's attacks in the fireballs. If he could find the red-robed Daoist's real body, he could kill him with a single strike. But alas, he just could not lock onto the Daoist's erratic figure. Furious, he waved the blood centipede sword and sent out a great sheet of blood-red light to protect himself, lest the fireballs would stick to him. Up on top of the city wall, Ing Zishan, who had inherited Ing Zheng's cauldron, was about to step in and replace Bai Wuyong when Reverend Flysoul, who was standing next to him, cried out, "General, back off now. Let me deal with this red-skinned ox nose." Laughing wildly, Reverend Flysoul leaped down from the city wall with 2 great hammers in hand. With a swing of his hammers, a spirit talisman flew up, rolling up a great plume of black smoke, and whistling toward the fireballs that blotted the sky. The black smoke and fireballs collided with each other, and produced a series of explosions. The red-robed Taoist was nearly brushed by a plume of black smoke, and the jarring ghost howls coming from it shook his divine soul, nearly making him fall to the ground. Bai Wuyong seized the opportunity to return to the top of the city wall. He cupped his fist and bowed to Wu Qi. Wu Qi nodded approvingly at him, then focused all his attention on the fight between Reverend Flysoul and the red-robed Taoist. Bai Wuyong was forced to retreat by the red-robed Taoist's magic, which reminded Wu Qi of the biggest shortcoming of the generals of the East Sea. The cultivation techniques of the human race could only make the soldiers of the human race possess extraordinary strength and strong fleshly bodies, but they could not cultivate any divine abilities or magical powers. If an immortal was approached by a human general, the immortal would be dead for sure. But if the distance between the human general and the immortal was increased, the human general would be in danger of losing his life. All the generals of Dayu would fuse with all kinds of powerful beast souls, using them to enhance their strength, and at the same time, possess all kinds of divine abilities they had when they were alive. The cultivation base of the generals of the East Sea was very good at the moment, but their beast souls were lacking. As for the generals of the East Sea who had cultivated to the realm of second Pangu heaven, they would not fuse with the beast soul of a wind-breaking wolf like Yen Bugui did. Would they? That would be too shabby, and they would not take the experts of Gold Immortal Realm seriously. He had to find a way to find a group of powerful beast souls. Wu Qi frowned and looked at Ao Buzin. This guy was used to being ruthless. Would he mind using the souls of his children as the beast souls of the generals of the East Sea? Would he mind? Probably not, but Wu Qi could not bring himself to do it. Just as he was thinking about this, a miserable howl rang out, and the red-robed Taoist was smashed to pieces by Reverend Flysoul's hammer. The fireball shot out by the red-robed Taoist was blocked by the dark mist that rose from Reverend Flysoul's hammer, and could not get close to him at all. Reverend Flysoul, on the other hand, was skilled in illusions. With a few flashes of his body, he created a few illusions to attract the attention of the red-robed Taoist, while his true form appeared behind him and smashed down with the hammer. After winning 2 rounds in a row, Reverend Flysoul triumphantly swung his hammer at the itinerant immortals of the Ling dynasty, then spun and flew up to the top of the city wall. Surprisingly, one of the itinerant immortals on the other side recognized Reverend Flysoul. The old Taoist with an ancient face looked over and snapped, "Reverend Flysoul, you are a man who has truly transcended the worldly affairs, enjoying the peace and quiet like a wild crane. Why did you come to this muddy water? You are from the Tao League, and even if you want to enter the worldly affairs to accumulate virtues, you should choose the Ling dynasty. Why did you go to the enemy of the Tao League?" Reverend Flysoul was taken aback. He shook his head and shouted at the group of itinerant immortals on the side of the Ling dynasty. "Your father is from the Tao League, your mother is from the Tao League, and your whole family is from the Tao League. I'm old Taoist? Lao Tzu is not from the Tao League. Lao Tzu has another master, and he has nothing to do with the Tao League. Don't try to curry favor with me." Wu Qi gave Reverend Flysoul a look, smiled, then turned to the itinerant immortals and asked, "Which senior immortal is willing to make a new contribution to the East Sea?" Immortaling chuckled evilly, then transformed into a green ghost flame and slowly drifted down the city wall. A quarter of an hour later, Immortaling had used some unknown evil magic, which made the bodies of 3 itinerant immortals on the other side fester, and kill them on the spot. After that, more and more itinerant immortals from the East Sea went out to challenge the Ling dynasty. Some of them won, some were defeated, and some were killed. However, over the past few days, there were over 3,000 itinerant immortals in Jindong City, while there were only about 200 outside the city. After a day of fierce fighting, only 7 or 8 of the itinerant immortals from the Ling dynasty were left alive. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, the general of the Ling dynasty army gave the order to retreat. The army of 1 million, together with the remaining itinerant immortals, retreated to the east in a sorry state. Drums and trumpets rang out in Jindong City. The army of the East Sea, which had retreated thousands of miles to the west a few days ago, set out once again. 3,000 itinerant immortals were divided into more than 100 groups, continuing to attack the Ling dynasty together with the army. This time, The generals of the East Sea Army were given all kinds of magical treasures by Wuxia and the others. So, even if they ran into those itinerant immortals, they would not be helpless against them. Naturally, the upper echelons of the East Sea would be responsible for planning the march and the war. Meanwhile, Wuxia stood on top of the city wall, looking at the army leaving in the distance with other thoughts swirling in his mind. The itinerant immortals of the Dao League could join the Ling dynasty in the war. The itinerant immortals of the Saint League could also join the war in the East Sea. Those lofty existences of the Dao-fusing realm had racked their brains and used various means to fight and kill on Pangu continent. Why did he have to follow their steps? Why did he have to act according to their plans? The Huahuang clan, the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan, the Yen Emperor Shinno, and the others had all fallen into the trap of the Dao League and Buddhist League. Emperor Haozuan, the Emperor of Nuyu Zhongtingyun, and the others were fighting hard according to the rules set by the Dao League and Buddhist League. But he had a chance to jump out of the various plans of the Dao League and Buddhist League. What could be more heaven-defying than the scroll of stealing? After pondering for a moment, Wuxia suddenly smiled. Both the Buddhist League and the Dao League were now eyeing the throne of the human emperor, and he had chosen Great Wu to intervene. But Great Wu's strength was limited, and even Wuxia himself was not sure if he could succeed. Perhaps he could do something else. After all, he could not let the Dao League and the Buddhist League live so comfortably. At last, Wuxia turned to Princess Zhonglu and said with a smile, "It's not fun to be used as a chess piece. Tell me, if I swallowed one of their big flags in advance, would some people go crazy? Would they reveal a loophole?" Princess Zhonglu looked at Wuxia in surprise and asked, "What do you want to do?" Wuxia licked his lips and said in a low voice, "Nothing, I just want to kill the Emperor of Nuyu in advance." Chapter 954. While the war on the East Sea was raging, Wuxia and Princess Zhonglu had secretly left the East Sea and sneaked to the back of Pangu continent. In the primordial world between the front and the back of Pangu continent, the 9 blood-draining celestial fiends had constructed a huge fiend-slaying sword formation with themselves as the eye of the formation, and the 36,000 Kunwu swords that Wuxia had condensed with primal purple energy. Amidst the vast sword formation, 1.08 billion fist-sized purple balls of light floated slowly. They were the stars condensed from the great Dao Wuxia obtained from the kaleidoscopic star core. To construct the formation, Wuxia had exhausted all his magic power, and it took him 7 days and 7 nights of meditation with the help of Princess Zhonglu to recover all his energy. After leaving the heaven refining cauldron in the core of the formation, where it kept absorbing natural energy to supply the formation, Wuxia and Princess Zhonglu flew to the back of Pangu continent, heading in the direction of Great Horns' origin tree of fire. Wuxia wanted to kill the Emperor of Nuyu and seize the Emperor aura that he had obtained by splitting Diyu. Wuxia had tried it before. The Emperor aura was similar to the willpower of the Buddhist League, a power of faith generated by the respect and worship of the Emperor of hundreds of millions of people. He had once tried to steal a wisp of Emperor aura from Wu Tianming and condense it into a new one with primal purple energy. He had succeeded in stealing the Emperor aura, but when he tried to fuse it with primal purple energy and transform it into Emperor aura, Wuxia failed. Under the impact of the primal purple energy, the Emperor aura dissipated like dew under the sun, and Wuxia did not even have time to react. And the wisp of Emperor aura nearly shook Wu Tianming's foundation of the human emperor, causing the Emperor aura in him to nearly dissipate. Wuxia dared not to take the risk, so he had to give up for the time being. However, Wuxia had an intuition that if he was given enough Renhuang Qi, he would definitely be able to decipher its secrets. With enough Emperor energy, Wuxia could not kill Emperor Haozuan, and from a sentimental point of view, Wuxia would not attack him. But it was the Emperor of Nuyu's duty to kill him. As a subject of Diyu, it was Wuxia's duty to kill traitors. Half of the Renhuang aura of the orthodox Renhuang was enough for Wuxia to figure out how this thing was formed and how to simulate it with the primordial violet qi. Both Wuxia and Princess Zhonglu had the cultivation base of Dao-breaking realm, which allowed them to fly extremely fast. Pangu continent had expanded greatly these days, and the nearby terrain had undergone great changes. It had taken Wuxia a month to find Great Horn's lair with Princess Zhang. Seeing the huge origin tree of fire towering between heaven and earth from a distance, Wuxia nodded to Princess Zhang. Princess Zhang gave Wuxia a slightly worried look, then threw herself at him, hugged him tightly, and bit him hard on the lips. "Be careful." Wuxia nodded and said, "Don't worry, Great Horns is a straightforward man. At most he will beat me up. He won't kill me, his savior. Just stay here and wait for me. If something goes wrong, we'll teleport into the formation. At worst, we'll just have to destroy the 9 blood-draining celestial fiends, and we'll be able to leave at will." Princess Zhang nodded her head seriously. From under her sleeve, she took out an altarpiece together with the skulls of immortal beasts, various strange magical items, candles, and swords, and began to prepare a set of spells with the most powerful power she knew. The curse was similar to the cosmic constellation restrictive magic Huhai had cultivated in the past. It could connect the many earth veins on Pangu continent into the altar, and use their power to launch an attack. If the curse dared to resist, a careless mistake would cause a great geological disaster to befall Pangu continent. At that time, calamities would befall the world, and even the almighty experts of the Dao-fusing realm would not dare to bear such a huge amount of karma. When Princess Zhang was ready, Wuxia transformed into the old man Yuanling in his previous life. Stepping on a cloud of Yuanling's energy, he drifted toward the origin tree of fire. The Sphinx was yawning on a branch of the incomparably huge origin tree of fire. There was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Clearly, he had just had a good meal, but it was unknown whether his food was divine beasts or some unlucky immortals. Under the tree, Great Horns was frowning and stroking the big hole that the divine tree had made in the war. That day, the Taoist had grabbed Yao Ling with his divine ability and smashed her heavily on the tree, creating a huge pit 1,000 feet in circumference and hundreds of feet deep, causing the tree to lose a lot of energy. Later on, Wuxia stole a huge amount of energy essence from the origin tree of fire, which severely damaged the tree's vitality. Now its gleam was a little dim. Great Horns did not know what Wuxia had done, and he blamed the Taoist for all the crimes. As he stroked the damaged part of the tree, he cursed all the Taoist's relatives. Chaos Fiend gods did not have parents or elders, but Great Horns did not care about that. He had cursed the Taoist's parents, his grandparents, and 18 generations of his ancestors over and over again, uttering all kinds of obscenities that were comparable to the words of 1,000 hooligans in the marketplace. Wuxia was speechless as he listened to Great Horns' curses from a distance. Great Horns, who was once so simple and simple-minded, was now not only a supreme existence in the realm of Dao fusing, but even his verbal skills had become so terrifying. Wuxia vaguely remembered that when Great Horns cursed people, he only knew how to use the 3-character sutra. But now he was able to come up with all kinds of fantastic words, which made Wuxia feel ashamed of his inferiority. Wuxia sighed with emotion, then stepped on a green cloud and flew forward. All his attention was focused on the tree's injury, so Great Horns did not notice Wuxia's approach. The lion man was lying on a branch digesting the delicacy he had just eaten, so he did not notice Wuxia's presence either. But the dozens of red-robed Taoists sitting cross-legged under the tree and cultivating by the sea of lava opened their eyes at the same time. The oldest among them, an old Taoist with a tuft of white hair carefully tied into a bun the size of a jujube, pointed a finger at Wuxia and snapped, "Who are you, evildoer? How dare you come here to court death?" About 100 miles away from the origin tree of fire, Wuxia halted the cloud with a smile on his face. He had not seen these red-robed Taoists the last time he came here. Judging by their cultivation base, the bald old Taoist was a 3rd-tier primordial expert, while the other half of them were at the level of primordial expert. The remaining half of them, more than 30 people, were at the level of peak-level gold immortals, the kind of people who could step into the realm of primordial at any time. It seemed that these were the proud disciples that Great Horns had collected over the years. Although Great Horns did not establish a sect and recruit disciples, he did not live in a vacuum. He would always have some interactions with others. Perhaps, when he was wandering in the world, he would instruct a few itinerant cultivators and save a few fated people. These people could be considered as his in-name disciples. Now, facing the pressure from Tao League and Buddhist League, it was very likely that great horns had gathered them together, taught them the great Tao, and even forcibly improved their cultivation base and magic power. The bald Taoist cried out. Great horns turned around with a gloomy face and snapped. What are you shouting about? What's the big deal about making a fuss about nothing? So what if someone came here by mistake? If they are good people, let them leave, and if they are not, let your senior brother eat them. What are you shouting about? What are you shouting about? Without giving Wuxia a glance, Great Horns pointed at the red-robed Taoists and scolded them. You'd better learn more from Lao Tzu. Learn what it means to be steady, what it means to be mature, and what it means to, damn it. While he was lecturing the Taoists to be mature, steady, calm in the face of danger, and have the demeanor of a great general, Great Horns suddenly glanced at Wuxia. His body shuddered, and after a curse he was already in front of Wuxia, kicking hard at Wuqi's waist. Wuxia laughed wildly. Following the Chaos Fiend God's usual fighting style, Wuxia also kicked his foot at Great Horns. A loud boom rang out. Wuqi's calf was broken into 3 parts, and he staggered back a long distance. After taking a deep breath, a clear stream of energy circulated through his body, and the broken bones were healed at an incredible speed. Great Horns, on the other hand, gave a muffled grunt and stood still. Gritting his teeth, he stared at Wuxia, then subconsciously reached out to touch the pair of horns on his head of different lengths and said, Yuan Ling, you damned old monster. Why are you still calling me Lao Tzu's horn? Wuxia glared at him, then pointed a finger at Great Horns and snapped, Bullshit. It's just a horn. What about the fact that I've saved your life? Great Horns was taken aback. He blinked and recalled how he had lost his horn years ago. After blinking his eyes quickly for a while, he bowed deeply to Wuxia with a solemn face and bent his body almost 90 degrees. You're right, old monster. If you hadn't saved me back then, my soul would have perished long ago, and I wouldn't have achieved the Tao-fusing realm today. Come to think of it, you are my great benefactor. He straightened up and patted his chest, then glared at Wuxia and shouted, Lao Tzu has always been a man who distinguishes between kindness and hatred. You've done Lao Tzu a great favor, so you're Lao Tzu's distinguished guest. When he comes to visit in the future, he'll naturally treat you with good tea and wine. But you've chopped off one of Lao Tzu's horns, so every time you come to visit, Lao Tzu will give you a kick. Ha ha ha, you're going to suffer a little. Wuqi's face twitched. This guy still hasn't lost his nature, and he's still as straightforward as ever. Before Wuxia could speak, Great Horns suddenly roared and leaped back tens of miles. Damn it, he shouted, pointing a finger at Wuxia and shouting. Didn't you get into a conflict with those ox-nosed bald donkeys and the thugs they colluded with at that time when you went to explore that ancient sacred palace? Didn't you get killed by them? Why are you still alive and kicking? Rubbing his nose, Wuxia said with a wry smile. It's a long story. Great Horns was taken aback. Frowning, he picked his nose and nodded vigorously. All right, tell me in detail. Lion face, get the hell out of here for Lao Tzu. Go to that old thieving monkey and ask him for a few jars of good wine. Tell him that if he doesn't give Lao Tzu the best wine, Lao Tzu will set fire to his monkey mountain again, and let his children and grandchildren have nothing left. With his arms around Great Horn's shoulders, Wuxia and Great Horns flew to the origin tree of fire and sat down. Great Horns introduced Wuqi's background to his disciples, boasting about Wuxia to the top, such as the #1 alchemist among Chaos Fiend gods, the #1 artifact master, the #1 eccentric temperament, the #1 ruthless, the #1 thick skin, and so on. After talking for a long time, Wuxia finally could not stand Great Horns' spitting. He stamped his foot and asked in a deep voice, Cut the crap. I'm going to kill the Emperor of New Yu, and you have to help me conceal the heaven secret. Great Horns was taken aback, but then his eyes burst with a strong green light as he grabbed Wuxia excitedly. Chapter 955. What was the heavenly secret? The heavenly Tao was a river, sometimes clear, and sometimes muddy. All living beings were the fish, shrimps, and crabs struggling in the river. Occasionally, a few of them could jump out of the river, and look around were cultivators of the realm of Tao reasoning. Those who could lie on the rocks in the river and look around safely, but would be knocked back into the river from time to time, were almighty experts of the realm of Tao breaking. Only cultivators of the realm of Tao fusing could glide on the water like water spiders, and leap into the sky from time to peep around. Whether it was a cultivator of the realm of Tao reasoning, Tao breaking, or Tao fusing, what they saw in the river was the heavenly secret. When the river was clear, those with good eyesight and luck could see the movements of the fish, and divine the fates of all living beings. When the river was muddy, they could also figure out the cause of the muddy water, either because of natural or man-made disasters, and thus wisely avoid those unpredictable crises. Any almighty expert who had reached the realm of Tao could muddy the river with his divine abilities. A cultivator of the realm of Tao reasoning might only be able to muddy a small section of the river, but a cultivator of the realm of Tao breaking could turn a large section of the river upside down, making it impossible for outsiders to see the fate of a few small fish and shrimps hidden in the river. But when they reached the realm of Tao fusing, as long as they wanted to, the entire river would be turned upside down by them, like pouring a bottle of ink into a bucket of water, and shaking it violently for a while, turning the entire heavenly Tao pitch black, and making it impossible for anyone to see what was going on in it. Of course, the Tao fusing expert himself would know what means he had used to muddy the heavenly secret. Even if the heavenly secret was muddled, he could still trace it back using his divine abilities and mystic arts, and still have some confidence to learn what he wanted from it. For example, now that the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs had joined forces to muddy the heavenly secret, it was almost impossible for outsiders to find any clues from it. But the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs knew the direction of the chaotic heavenly secret. As long as they followed the direction carefully, they could still control many things. The movements of the fishes, shrimps, and crabs could not be hidden from their eyes. Just as Wuxia wanted to kill the Emperor of Nuyu, as an important pawn of the celestial court, and a tool to divide the Emperor aura of the human race, the Emperor's existence would be targeted by at least multiple Tao fusing experts. After all, the Emperor of Nuyu wanted to divide the Emperor aura of the human race. If he was killed by Emperor Haozuan, the Emperor aura would belong to Diyu, and all the previous plans of the celestial court would be in vain. This was not a problem that could be solved by placing a few more experts around the Emperor. Since the celestial court was using the Emperor as a chess piece, they had to be careful that other brilliant players might destroy it. Therefore, there must be some almighty experts of the realm of Tao fusing watching his every move through the heavenly secret. Even if someone wanted to kill him, it might attract their attention. Wuxia had made up his mind to kill the Emperor of Nuyu. He could hide this wisp of killing intent in himself, so that it would not involve the heavenly secret, which was now in a mess, and the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs would discover his plan. But if Wuxia wanted to kill the Emperor of Nuyu, even though Wuxia could hide himself well in the heavenly Tao, and even the heavenly tribulation could not find Wuqia's true form. However, it was like an invisible person killing someone. Even if you were invisible and no one could find you, the moment you killed someone, the person being killed would be under the watchful eyes of everyone. When you killed someone, your existence would be discovered. For those terrible experts of the realm of Tao fusing, as long as you revealed the slightest clue, they would immediately track your true form through the vast heavenly Tao, and then launch the most terrible revenge. In fact, the moment Wuxia approached the Emperor of Nuyu and attacked, the heavenly Tao would sense it, and the Emperor would emit a strange aura that would attract the attention of those almighty experts. As long as there was the slightest warning sign, Wuxia would not be able to kill the Emperor of Nuyu. Therefore, he had to find someone who could confuse the heavenly secret and muddle the great river of heavenly Tao, so that no one could get any useful information from it. Great Horns widened his eyes and listened carefully to Wuqia's plan. With a restrictive barrier protecting them, even Great Horn's disciples could not know what they were discussing. As Wuxia spoke, Great Horns kept nodding his head. The flames on his horns soared more than 1,000 feet into the sky excitedly, and the roaring of the flames sounded very cheerful. After hearing Wuqia's words, Great Horn slapped Wuxia on the shoulder and said, "It's settled. I knew something was wrong during this period of time. Is this the root of the relationship? Why are they the only ones who can confuse the heavenly secret? We can also meddle in this matter. It's only fair that no one can see or predict what is going on, isn't it? He smacked himself on the head a few times and began to grumble. No wonder he had been feeling a little confused lately, and there were many things he could not calculate clearly. Occasionally, he would notice that someone was peeking at him, but when he looked carefully, he could not find out who the person was. Wuxia nodded to himself. This was the consequence of the heavenly secret being obscured by someone. When an outsider had the upper hand, it would be difficult for one to calculate any plan. On the other hand, one's every move could be watched by others, and the whereabouts of all one's disciples could not be hidden from others. They could set up a premeditated plan for one's actions at any time and disintegrate all one's moves with the least effort. As early as Wuxi's trip to Xianyuan Peak, Wuxia had sensed that the once stable heavenly Tao was beginning to be disturbed by someone. And in the last 2 years, the feeling had become more and more obvious. Every time he meditated, he could clearly sense the violent vibration of the heavenly Tao, which made him feel sticky all over as if he was shrouded in a layer of mist. It was very uncomfortable. Wuxi's cultivation base was only in the realm of Tao breaking. In other words, he was still passively struggling with the heavenly Tao. It was true that he was invisible in the heavenly Tao, but his true form was still in the great river. It was like a fish in the water. When someone deliberately stirred the river into a whirlpool, the fish would be the first to know. On the other hand, people like great horns, who had already left the river, would be slower to react. After a round of complaints, Great Horns tore open the void in front of him and cried out, Hey! Are you all awake? Listen to me, those bald donkeys and ox noses are not very kind. Sink your mind into the heavenly Tao and sense it. These guys have made their move before us. A dozen voices came out of the hole Great Horns had torn open, and everyone was shocked. What's going on? Yao Ling was complaining. How could they have completely muddled the heavenly Tao in advance? Well, Wu Divinity, you are the quickest among us. Why didn't you warn us about this? TSK, we've suffered a great loss. Wu Divinity's gloomy voice rang out. Who among us has ever deceived the heavenly Tao for so many years? No one answered. Great Horns shook his head and grinned at Wuxia. Then he said loudly, Ugh, cut the crap. We've all been muddle-headed for so many years, and none of us has ever played with these things. Well, only those bald donkeys and ox noses like to play with things like deceiving the heavenly Tao. We're used to fighting with our fists and kicks, but they like to play sneaky tricks. You can't blame Wu Divinity for not warning us. None of us had the idea, did we? Almost in unison, the 18 saints smacked their lips and cursed the non-existent ancestors of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs at the same time. Wuxia just shook his head. These 18 saints were basically the same as Great Horns. How could they allow a group of people like them to have the cultivation base of Tao-fusing realm? However, a gleam flickered in Wuxi's eyes. According to the methods of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, if someone was as shrewd and calculative as them and wanted to fuse with the Tao, he would most likely be attacked by their joint forces. In that case, it was thanks to his one-track mind that Great Horns was able to fuse with the Tao. Then Wuxia immediately thought of himself. If he were to fuse with the Tao in the future, would the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs attack him? There was almost no doubt that they would do something to him. Especially when he was a non-existent person to the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. If a non-existent person suddenly fused with the Tao, it would be strange if they did not react violently. He had to prepare for a rainy day and find the safest way to protect himself. Perhaps he would have to have a good talk with these 18 saints. Wu Divinity's gloomy voice rang out. Great Horns, cut the crap. With your temperament, you would never think of this. Who is the expert who gave you the instruction? Wuxia rose to his feet slowly and bowed toward the void. Fellow Taoists, I Yuan Ling offer greetings. A series of exclamations rang out, and Lord Changmu's was the most ear-piercing. Are you Yuan Ling the old monster? Weren't you killed a long time ago? So you are still alive? Your cultivation base is not bad. A dozen divine senses poked out of the holes, and scanned Wuqi from top to bottom. Wuqi retracted all the mystic arts in the scroll of stealing, and let them examine him as they pleased. He could tell from the aura in their divine senses that these 18 saints did not mean him any harm. Wu Divinity's loud laughter rang out. Wonderful. Yuan Ling, the old monster. It's great that you are still alive. With your ability, if we can hold off the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs, it shouldn't be a problem for you to bully their disciples, right? Wu Qi smiled, cupped his fist and said, I'm going to bully them, so I'll have to trouble you to completely muddle the heaven secret. Since we're going to muddle the heaven secret, no one should be able to benefit from it. They can't be the only ones taking advantage of us every time, can they? As the laughter echoed out, 18 bizarre waves of Dharma surged out from different parts of Pangu world, and quickly merged into the vast and invisible heavenly Tao. Sitting in Empress Wa's palace, the Wahuang clan was taken aback, and then suddenly burst out laughing. The 7 Buddhist patriarchs sitting in front of Empress Wa's palace opened their eyes in shock at the same time, and cursed angrily in a low voice. Amidst a vast ocean of white clouds, 9 Daozu were sitting in a circle. In the middle of them was a sphere of golden light that was expanding and contracting as they breathed. Vaguely, tens of thousands of blurry figures could be seen drifting in the golden light. The heavenly Tao was thrown into chaos. The 9 Daozu shuddered, and their hand incantation gestures were thrown into disorder at the same time. The vast heaven secret became a mess, and no one could get any information from it. Everyone's eyes were filled with darkness, and it was absolutely fair to everyone. Chapter 956. The streets and alleys of Yuxiong, the capital of Nuyu, were crowded with people, many of whom were itinerant immortals and cultivators in Taoist robes. It was impossible to see any immortals or cultivators in Liangzhu, but in this city, some immortals had even been recruited into the army and various government offices. It was said that dozens of immortal sects with gold immortals had joined the army, and those gold immortals had become important ministers in Nuyu's imperial court. Naturally, their disciples were superior in the city, and no one dared to provoke them. Clad in a Taoist robe of water and fire, with a tortoiseshell sword on his back and a Rui scepter forged of purple gold, and inlaid with 7 treasures in his collar, Wu Qi swaggered into the city without being questioned. The soldiers who were stationed at the city gate turned a blind eye to Wu Qi, and even the officer of the city gate gave Wu Qi a bright smile with a hint of fear. Wu Qi felt sick of the flattery from the officer. In the past, such a thing would never happen in Du. Even if you were a high-ranking official of a province, if you entered or left the city through the gate officer in charge of guarding the city would not give you extra care because of your official position. Instead, he would ask you to stop and be inspected. They were old-fashioned, but they were simple and honest, and never had such a flattering, even somewhat obscene, smile on their faces. The streets of Yuxiong were bustling with men and women, and there were even men and women openly flirting on the street. Even in broad daylight, there were women in gorgeous clothes winking at men outside a few exquisite pavilions built of fragrant wood. Wu Qi could not help but be shocked. Isn't Nuyu opening up too fast? He thought. He had never seen such a scene anywhere in Du. How did the city become like this? The occasional sounds of sex could be heard coming out of the pavilions. When Wu Qi's divine sense enveloped the pavilions, he found that there were guests having sex with the women in broad daylight. Some of the guests had nascent souls and Jin Dan in their bodies, which showed that they were itinerant cultivators, while others had extremely strong bodies, which showed that they were warriors who had practiced the cultivation technique of the human race. But in both Du and Nuyu, only soldiers who had been selected for the army could practice the cultivation techniques of the human race. In other words, these men who were fooling around in a brothel in broad daylight should be Nuyu's officers or soldiers. If they were in Du, not to mention running out of the barracks to do such shady business in broad daylight, even the slightest dereliction of duty would be severely punished by military law. But in these brothels alone, there were more than 200 Nuyu generals and soldiers, several of whom had the cultivation base above the second Pangu heaven. Clearly, they were the generals of Nuyu's army. Wuqi could not help but roll his eyes. New you is indeed a new trend in DU. How could such a thing happen in DU? As he walked along the street, he suddenly heard a commotion in front of him. A gray-haired old man was kicked into the air, and when he fell to the ground, his body was broken into 7 or 8 pieces. Suddenly, the shrill cry of a girl rang out. Wuqi hurried over and saw a young man in a gorgeous robe, laughing and kissing a beautiful girl who was only 13 or 14 years old in his arms. A group of Nuyu soldiers in leather armor surrounded the young man, laughing and drawing their blades to threaten the passers-by nearby, telling them not to come close and meddle in their business. Wuqi was deeply shocked once again. It had only been a few years since Nuyu split from DU, but the Emperor of Nuyu had been able to corrupt the atmosphere to such an extent. The Emperor of Nuyu was really something to be proud of. Perhaps it was not only the Emperor of Nuyu's problem, but those immortal sects who had submitted to him had also made a great contribution. They had completely corrupted the upper echelons of the human race, and then gradually corrupted the whole human race, just like the humans in outer heavenly realms and the mortal worlds. When the human race was no longer human, when they lost confidence in themselves and all hope, they would naturally worship those sacred immortals and Buddhas, and the whole human race would fall completely under the control of Tao League and Buddhist League. With a ripping sound, the young man tore the girl's coarse cloth to shreds. Her fair legs were still stained with mud, and chunks of lotus roots were rolling all over the ground beside her. Clearly, she and the gray-haired old man had come to Yuxiong City to sell lotus roots, but they had encountered such an unexpected disaster. Her clothes were torn, and her fair body was exposed in front of everyone. She threw her head back and screamed, then spat out an arrow of blood from her mouth. She had committed suicide by biting her tongue. She was so fast that even Wuqi had no time to react. A wisp of her soul had already drifted up into the air, and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. The corner of Wuqi's eyes twitched with anger. He snorted coldly and flicked his finger, casting a small restrictive spell around the young man and the soldiers who had helped the wicked. Then, Wuqi moved quickly, darting through the crowd like a fish, and left the street in the blink of an eye. With a rumble, a red flame rose into the sky. The young man and the soldiers were enveloped by the sudden red flame, burning them and making them writhe on the ground. There was something strange about the flame, for it only burned the young man and his subordinates, and even burned their fat. However, when someone accidentally touched the flame, it seemed to be an illusion and did not hurt him at all. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the young man was burned to a pile of ashes. Standing in the distance, Wuqi looked up into the sky and saw the souls of the young man and the dozens of soldiers around him fly up into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Wuqi could not help but grin coldly. What a grand plan. Could it be that from today on, you will collect the souls of all the dead living beings on Pangu continent, and use them to become deities? Hee, even if this fellow becomes a deity in the future, I'll find him and beat him to death. He was standing on the side of the road, staring blankly into the distance. All of a sudden, a heavy dragon skin whip came lashing at him, and a shrill, unpleasant voice cried out, "Get lost! You filthy Taoist! Why don't you get lost now? Who dares to stand in the way of Lord Sinocure's chariot?" Wuqi dodged the whip and took 2 steps back, then saw a pure gold chariot slowly passing by, surrounded by over 100 soldiers. A few tall and strong eunuchs were standing on the carriages, proudly lashing their dragon-skinned whips everywhere. Whenever they saw someone blocking their way or someone they didn't like, they would lash the whips right on the head. As he scanned the chariot with his divine sense, Wuqi could not help but grin coldly. How could an ant-like existence like an 18th-tier gold immortal act so domineeringly? What surprised Wuqi the most was that the few eunuchs on the chariot were real eunuchs. Eunuchs who had their genitals cut off. There was no such thing as eunuchs on Pangu continent. Even the human emperor of Great Yu adhered to the same principle. Everyone might have different official positions and titles, but fundamentally, all the human race were ordinary existences of creation, and there was no distinction between nobility and inferiority. Therefore, there were no eunuchs in DU who harmed the human body and destroyed people's dignity. All the eunuchs were healthy men, and the eunuchs and palace maids married each other to produce offspring. Some eunuchs were even as powerful as the ministers of the outer court. But in New Yu, Wuqi's horizons were broadened. He saw eunuchs, real eunuchs. Wuqi could imagine the process. When the eunuchs were cut off for the first time in the cleansing room of the imperial palace, the whole of New Yu had begun to degenerate. They began to move closer to the human kingdoms in outer heavenly realms, and to the human beings in the mortal world. The whole of Yoxiong City gave Wuqi the impression of ostentatious, decadent, confused, and directionless. It was filled with a filthy atmosphere that Wuqi was not used to and even disgusted by. Looking up at the sky with cold eyes, Wuqi sneered. "This is what you want, isn't it? You want the human race to degenerate step by step, from human to human. And then you can do whatever you want with it." Grinning coldly, Wuqi glanced at the chariot of the so-called honorable revered elder, then flicked his sleeve and walked boldly toward the imperial palace in the middle of the city. Along the way, he intentionally or unintentionally released the aura of a peak-level gold immortal, which attracted the attention of others. Hundreds of divine senses, strong and weak, scanned his body, but when he deliberately spread his powerful divine sense outward, all the divine senses carefully avoided him. The so-called honorable sinecure, an 18th-tier gold immortal, leaped out of the coach in fear and trepidation, ran to Wuqi's side, and put on a flattering smile as he said, "Welcome, senior. I'm really..." Wuqi slapped the gold immortal in the face and sent him flying far away. Half of his cheekbone was smashed by Wuqi, and all his teeth flew out of his mouth. Wuqi snorted coldly and said, "How dare you behave so presumptuously in front of me, Taoist?" Striding up to the imperial palace, Wuqi shouted at the generals stationed in front of the gate, "I'm here to be an official. Tell your steward how high I can be and how many benefits I can get. If the benefits are too little..." Hee. A ferocious and domineering aura towered into the sky. Chi-Chi's body swayed, and at the same time, he was knocked to the ground by the murderous aura. 3 supreme oracles in black robes appeared silently in front of Wuqi. When they sensed the aura emanating from Wuqi, they could not help but laugh at the same time. They bowed slightly to Wuqi, and one of them said with a chuckle, "Fellow Taoist, with your cultivation base, I'm sure there will be a good position for you in New Yu. Please come in. Everything can be discussed. Please, everything can be discussed. May I ask where fellow Taoist is from?" Glancing at the few supreme oracles who had come out to greet the guests, Wuqi grinned. He glanced to his left and right, and with a sway of his body, a ferocious beast about 100 feet long with a dragon head and a tiger's body suddenly appeared. A terrible aura rolled out of him as Wuqi's aura suddenly broke through the peak of gold immortal realm and reached the level of the primordial realm. Opening his big mouth and laughing, Wuqi snorted coldly and said, "Now you know where I am from? I'm Lord Teeth. Hee. I've come down the mountain this time to seek glory, splendor, wealth, and to accumulate virtue." The 3 supreme oracles were startled, and then they cried out in ecstasy, "Hee." They exchanged a glance, then bowed respectfully. Then Wuqi transformed back into his human form and swaggered into the palace. 2 hours later, the Emperor of New Yu personally issued a decree, and the Lord Teeth, Wuqi, became New Yu's chief honorable elder. Chapter 957. It had been several days since he became New Yu's chief honorable elder. On this day, the Emperor of New Yu finally held a banquet to welcome Wuqi. It was also the first time Wuqi had seen the Emperor up close. In the extravagantly decorated Great Hall, the Emperor sat on the throne at the top of the 9-layered jade dais with a big smile on his face, raising his golden wine vessel and toasting to the courtiers, oracles, and honorable elders. The Great Hall was filled with thunderous cheers as everyone enjoyed themselves to their heart's content. Vats of fine wine were brought up one after another, and delicacies such as roasted cows and goats were served at high prices. Musicians were playing music in the corners of the Great Hall, and everyone in the hall was served by several enchanting and beautiful girls. For example, Wuqi was surrounded by 8 gorgeously dressed girls at the moment, and 2 of them had almost thrown themselves into his arms. Wuqi's current identity was Lord Teeth, the divine beast Lao Wu who had cultivated into a human form. He was Nu Yu's chief honorable elder and ranked first among the immortals recruited by the immortal sections. Therefore, he enjoyed excellent treatment, and the few girls around him were also the prettiest girls in the Great Hall, only slightly less attractive than the girls around the emperor and several other important ministers of Nu Yu. Drinking wine and feasting on meat, Wuqi's hands wandered up and down the girls' bodies, making them pant and have tears in their eyes. After spending so many years in Dark Een Celestial Tower with 90,000 concubines, Wuqi had a thorough understanding of a girl's body. His fingers were always skimming the edges of the girls' most sensitive areas, giving them a feeling of being tickled through their boots. The uncomfortable feeling of an itch that went deep into their bones, but could never be relieved, made them pant and moan, completely forgetting where they were. Out of the corner of his eye, Wuqi glanced at the emperor, who was sitting on the dais, while the emperor, who kept toasting with a wine vessel, was also studying Wuqi. The emperor of Nu Yu was in a good mood. His father, Emperor Haozuan, was attacking Nu Yu with the Great Yu army. However, Nu Yu's overall strength was equal to that of Yu, and with the help of countless extraordinary people who had come to his side, such as the many honorable elders in the imperial palace, they had inflicted great casualties on Yu's soldiers. At the moment, the war between Yu and Nu Yu was at a stalemate, and the front lines were in a stalemate. It was easy for Yu to complete the task given to the emperor by the Buddhist League. Over the past few days, Wuqi, who claimed to be Lord Teeth, had come to join them. After the overt and covert tests of Nu Yu's supreme oracles and gold immortal honorable elders, Wuqi found that Lord Teeth's true form was indeed a Yayu. In these overt and covert tests, Lord Teeth had also shown his overwhelming and terrible strength, so much so that even Nu Yu's supreme oracle was easily suppressed by his special divine ability. It was a great thing to have another strong helper. The emperor narrowed his eyes and smiled complacently. Looking at Wuqi, who had provoked a few girls, he raised his wine vessel high and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's congratulate Immortal Teeth. From today on, we are all family." Laughing and joking, Wuqi grabbed a teenage girl and poured a bottle of wine into her mouth, then brought his mouth close to hers and drank every single drop of the wine. The countless civil and military officials and revered immortals in the Great Hall laughed in unison, while the fiend immortals danced and yelled. The atmosphere was extremely foul, and the atmosphere was extremely foul. Several times, Wuqi wanted to kill the emperor with a sword strike, but each time, Wuqi was alarmed and dared not to do it. After observing the emperor for a long time, he noticed that there was a fist-sized golden lotus hanging on his waist. Wuqi reckoned that the golden lotus flower with only 6 petals was actually a clone created from some strange magical treasure, using a mighty divine ability. However, he dared not to attack it rashly as he could sense a very faint ripple of energy emanating from it occasionally. The main body of this lotus was definitely a top-notch Grand Mist supreme treasure. Moreover, it had been refined by an almighty being's blood, soul, and magic power for countless years. Even if it was just a small clone, its power was not to be underestimated. If Wuqi could not kill the emperor with a single strike, he would never have another chance. As an important pawn of Tao League and Buddhist League, a tool used to divide Yu's fortune, if the emperor was assassinated, Tao League and Buddhist League would surely protect him. Perhaps, the few old fogies would even send their clones to protect him. If that happened, how could Wuqi have a chance to kill him? He had to succeed with a single strike, and then try his best to kill all the princes and other members of the imperial clan who had betrayed Yu with the emperor. It would be best if he could kill all the members of Yu's imperial clan in Nu Yu, so that it would be impossible for Tao League and Buddhist League to set up another emperor. Without the bloodline of the human emperor, even if he made someone else the emperor of Nu Yu, his fortune would still be weakened. After thinking for a long time, Wuqi laughed unrestrainedly. In front of so many people, he ripped off the clothes of the girl next to him. The girl screamed and laughed as she threw herself into Wuqi's arms, her hair disheveled, her legs wrapped around Wuqi's waist, and her firm white flesh rubbed against Wuqi's face. Laughing strangely, Wuqi wantonly enjoyed the girl's tenderness. Sitting on the throne, the emperor also laughed. He whispered to a black-robed Taoist sitting next to him, "Please don't blame me, Reverend. A divine beast like Lao Ai is the most ferocious and ruthless, and he acts only on instinct. Although he is a little licentious, he didn't mean to be disrespectful to you. It doesn't matter, said the Taoist lightly. Your Majesty, you don't have to worry about me. This Lord Teeth is a straightforward man, and it seems that he is fated with Buddhist League. Your Majesty should know that we have lost 18 delightful Buddhas recently. If this Lord Teeth is willing to abandon the Tao and join the Buddhist League, he is a great candidate. The Emperor blinked and said with a smile, You're right, Reverend. This Lord Teeth does have the demeanor of a delightful Buddha. The Taoist laughed strangely, and the Emperor also laughed heartily. Wuxia, who was holding a few almost naked girls in his arms and groping them, also burst out laughing when he heard what the Taoist said. You want me to be a delightful Buddha? This is a good deal. Maybe I should send a clone to Buddhist League? Just relying on Tao Wu alone, that guy might not be able to get any useful information. The banquet did not end until dawn broke in the east. Drunk, Wuxia staggered back to the temple of revered elders on the west side of the palace with the help of a few girls. Then, he lay down and began to snore deafeningly. His body gradually swelled up and returned to his true form as Lao Ai. Carefully, a few girls brought warm water and white cloths to clean the hair and nails of this giant Swanni, making him look clean from head to toe. The temple of revered elders on the west side of the palace was a huge group of palaces, hundreds of large and small pavilions clustered together. Between the palaces were all kinds of exotic flowers and plants, and the scenery was extremely beautiful. The palace occupied by Wuxia was called Palace of Carefree, the largest and most magnificent among the temple of revered elders. Just next to it was the inner palace, where the emperor usually lived. Lying on the bed, Wuxia used one of his clones to transform into Lao Ai's true form, and continued to sleep soundly. Meanwhile, his true form had transformed into a wisp of invisible energy and burrowed into the ground, bypassing countless restrictive spells and formations along the way, heading straight for the inner palace. All the defensive spells and formations in Nuyu's palace were aimed at enemies invading from outside, while the ones inside, from the Temple of Revered Elders to the inner palace, were less than 1% of those on the outside. All the defensive spells and formations on the palace walls were deadly formations with amazing power, while more than 90% of those on the inside were early warning formations with very little power. After all, with the layer upon layer of protective spirit arrays on the periphery, no one would arrange too many spirit array restrictions in their own residences. Moreover, none of the defensive spells in the palace were separated from the system of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials and the Secret Palace. So Wuxia easily broke through them and sneaked outside the emperor's bedchamber. When the banquet was over, the eastern sky was just beginning to brighten. By right, the emperor should be ready to take care of the court and state affairs at this moment. But hiding outside the bedchamber's window, all Wuxia heard was the moaning of a woman, and the emperor's heavy panting like a horse that had run hundreds of miles with a heavy load. Wuxia was shocked. He glanced up at the sky and saw that it was already bright outside. This emperor of Nuyu really has a bit of an arrogant demeanor. After pondering for a moment, Wuxia circled around the bedchamber, and then entered it. Transforming into a wisp of ordinary flame, he hid in the light of a candle on a golden candlestick in a corner of the bedchamber. Glancing around curiously, Wuxia could not help but shake his head. It was not easy to kill the emperor of Nuyu. The golden lotus flower had been thrown to the ground along with the emperor's belt, but on his bed, 8 apsaras of the Buddhist League were fighting with him with astonishing cultivation bases and strange fragrances emanating from their bodies. Their long hair fluttered in the wind. Their bodies exuded a strange fragrance, and petals swirled around them all the time. Their bodies were so graceful that they seemed boneless, and their voices sounded like the cries of immortal birds. These were the characteristics of the apsaras of the Buddhist League. Not only were their cultivation bases weak, but they were also very intelligent. Anyone who approached them with the slightest malice would alert them instinctively. Moreover, these apsaras were born by attaching themselves to the natal Buddhist treasures of some almighty expert of the Buddhist League. Unless the almighty expert was killed, his Buddhist kingdom, and all his Buddhist treasures were destroyed, these apsaras would be unkillable. Even supreme existences of the Tao-fusing realm would have a headache if they were entangled by them. The 8 Apsaras happened to form a famous Buddhist formation of the Buddhist League, the 8 Dragons of Infinite Mahakasayapa Vajra formation, with amazing defensive power. It was a pure defensive formation, and it was said that once it was formed, no one could break it. The Buddhist League would not give the Emperor of New Yu 8 precious Apsaras for no reason, just to accompany him in bed. These Apsaras had a duty to keep him safe. Given their great intelligence, they would immediately form a defensive formation once Wuxia had the intention to kill the Emperor of New Yu. At the moment, the cultivation bases of the 8 Apsaras were all at the level of 9th-tier primordial immortals, and their enormous energy was constantly being injected into the Emperor's body to help him improve his cultivation base. But Wuxia could vaguely sense that somewhere in these Apsaras was connected to a Buddhist treasure of terrible power. Once needed, their cultivation bases would immediately rise to the peak of primordial immortals, and it was even possible for them to reach the realm of Tao breaking. The Apsaras of the Buddhist League could not be judged as ordinary immortals. They were not even real intelligent creatures. They were simply fighting tools cultivated by the Buddhist League. Wuxia smiled bitterly. If the 8 Apsaras had formed the 8 Dragons of Infinite Mahakasayapa formation, he would not have been able to break their defense. It was not easy to kill the Emperor of New Yu. Chapter 958. Ding. A crisp ringing echoed out, and it made Wuqi's body tremble. Subconsciously, he gave the bedchamber a glance, pondered for a brief moment, then plunged into the ground through the candlestick, carefully heading towards the direction where the ringing came from. Just outside the bedchamber, a small thatched hut had been built. The 3-foot-tall iron sill was striking, but there was no door. Inside the hut, about 10 feet in circumference, sat a black-clothed Taoist with a carp-shaped jade bell suspended in front of him. He was chanting a mantra, and tiny golden lotus flowers sprayed out of his mouth, hitting the bell and producing a crisp tinkle. Wuxia attached himself to a withered grass in the hut, and studied the Taoist carefully. He was dressed like a Taoist, but he was practicing the cultivation technique of the Buddhist League. As a result, his Buddhist energy was vast and endless. When Wuxia looked at him with the primal Dharma eye, he saw that he was like a little sun hovering in the hut, illuminating it with a brilliant light. He was definitely one of the few almighty experts of the Buddhist League today. Although all his magic power was converged in his body, Wuxia could feel that he was only half a step away from the realm of Tao breaking, and that he would be able to step into the realm of Tao breaking with just a little effort. Perhaps even the current Lord Buddha, Amitabha, did not have such a cultivation base. Who was this man? As he studied the Taoist carefully, Wuxia was shocked to find that he did not have an Adam's apple on his neck. His neck was slender, his skin delicate, and there was a faint fragrance wafting out of his body. He was a female cultivator. Wuxia pondered for a moment. He looked carefully at the Taoist for a while, then glanced at the bedchamber, and nodded as if he had understood something. He was afraid that the 8 Apsaras were the work of this Taoist. He had condensed his divine will into the bodies of the Apsaras, and had intercourse with the Emperor day and night. His body was pure and unstained, but his heart was struggling in the boundless mortal world, like walking on a tightrope on a cliff, struggling to transcend the realm of death. Like a fledgling in an eggshell, once he broke free from the mortal world, he would immediately reap the fruits of his labor. The black-clad Taoist was not only protecting the Emperor of New Yu, but also tempering his Buddhist nature with the Emperor in order to break through the realm of Tao breaking. In that case, the treasures entrusted by the 8 holy maidens were also in the hands of the black-robed Taoist? Wuxia looked up and down at the black-clothed Taoist, scanning him for a long time. Finally, his eyes focused on the carp-shaped jade bell floating in front of the Taoist. After a moment of silence, Wuxia silently left the thatched cottage and returned to Carefree Palace, merging with his clone. At the moment when Wuxia left, the black-clothed Taoist suddenly opened his eyes and glanced around suspiciously. After that, he began to calculate with his fingers, trying to figure out where the throbbing in his heart came from just now. However, Wuxia's escape technique was profound and did not leave any traces. Now that the 18 sages had joined forces to destroy the heavenly secrets, the black-robed Taoist could not find any clues even after spending a great deal of effort. With a cold snort, the black-clothed Taoist nodded slowly and said, "It seems that the filth of the mortal world has tainted my state of mind. Well, if I can struggle and transcend it, I will succeed in the great Tao. Your Majesty, please use the 18th mystic art I taught you, and I'll help you break through the current realm." As he recited the mantra, a golden lotus the size of a fist shot out and smashed heavily into the bell. The emperor shuddered as soon as the bell rang out, and a stream of hot air rushed up from his lower abdomen. He assumed a strange posture. The 8 holy maidens were dancing on the bed, making love to him one after another. Streams of hot air kept pouring into his body, bombarding the bottlenecks and obstacles in his cultivation base. Countless illusions emerged in front of the black-clothed Taoist. The 8 holy maidens who were having sex with the emperor seemed to have turned into her. Her face alternated between red and pale, and she kept reciting the mantra, fighting back all kinds of discomfort while silently extracting wisps of pure Zen power from the boundless lust and fusing them into her natal relic. All appearances are illusory. If you see all appearances but not appearances, you will see the Tathagata. The heart of the past is unattainable, the heart of the present is unattainable, and the heart of the future is unattainable. If you see me with your looks and beg me with your voice, you are walking the evil path, and you cannot see the Tathagata. All Dharma is like a dream, an illusion, a bubble, and a shadow, like dew or lightning. This is how you should view it. The scripture slowly drifted down from the top of the emperor's head into the vital acupoints all over his body, enveloping him in a vast sheet of golden light. In the next few days, Wuxia was very busy. In the name of the chief honorable elder of Nuyu, Wuxia acted like a tyrant in Nuyu. Every day, he ordered the officials of Nuyu to help him collect all kinds of herbs, as if they were his grandchildren. Whenever they made a mistake, he would beat and scold them, which made the officials in charge of the affairs of the Temple of Honorable Elders miserable and afraid to get close to Carefree Palace. After a few days of hard work, Wuxia had collected all the auxiliary herbs he needed. Then, he told the officials that he was going into a secluded cultivation and hid in Carefree Palace. If outsiders tried to get close to Carefree Palace, they would immediately be counterattacked by the restrictive spells he had set up. In just a few days, some oracles, honorable elders, and officials who tried to approach Carefree Palace intentionally or unintentionally were killed or wounded, and no one dared to take a step closer to the palace anymore. During these days, Wuxia produced the heaven refining cauldron and carefully concocted a dose of ecstasy perfume. With the innate divine tree in Yuanling's nether realm, the flower of yin and yang harmony as the main ingredient, and dozens of spirit herbs with acquired energy of harmony as supplementary ingredients. The effect of the medicine was not to be seen, but it was extremely potent. Years ago, when Yuanling created the prescription, he had secretly tried it on several chaos fiend gods. The result of the experiment was that the 7 chaos demon gods, who were originally best friends, became sworn enemies. 4 men and 3 women were bewitched by the ecstasy perfume, and they had sex for a month. Lord Yuanling, who was hiding at the side, was overjoyed, but it also made these chaos demon gods too ashamed to show their faces in front of others. The incident caused a stir in the circle of chaos fiend gods for a while, but no one except Yuanling knew what was wrong with the 7 chaos fiend gods. This showed what a bastard Yuanling was in Wuqi's previous life. He deserved to be beaten to death by the crowd. However, it also showed how overbearing the power of the ecstasy fragrance was. Even those talented chaos fiend celestials couldn't withstand its medicinal effects, so it was extremely difficult for others to resist it. He weighed the ecstasy incense in his hand, which was 100 times heavier than before, and let out a strange laugh. After putting away the heaven refining cauldron and all the restrictive spells, Wuqi swaggered out of the door. One of his clones transformed into Lord Teeth and went to the officials of the Temple of Honorable Elders, asking them to accompany him on a tour around Yuxiong City. Meanwhile, his true form went underground and came back to the Taoist's hut. After a few days, the emperor was still fighting with the enchanting and beautiful Apsaras in high spirits. The Taoist was clearly at a critical juncture. 9 layers of Buddhist light were rising behind her head, gradually fusing with one another. If they could be fused into one, the power of the Buddha in her true form would be completely fused with what the 8 Apsaras had obtained through the cultivation of the mortal world, and she would step into the realm of Tao breaking. In the Emperor's bedchamber, the Emperor howled and attacked the Apsaras beneath him. In the hut next door, the Taoist, whose face was as red as blood, was rapidly reciting a mantra. While suppressing the strange feelings that the Apsaras had given her true form with her mind as clear as water, she was exercising the meditation technique with great caution to take the critical step. As soon as Wuxia removed the cork of the ecstasy perfume, an invisible and odorless plume of smoke rose, turned into 2 twisting and intertwining streams of energy, and went into the Taoist's nostrils. The Taoist's face, which was so red that it looked like it was about to drip blood, suddenly turned purple-red. At the same time, all the sensitive parts of her body were bursting with hot currents that frightened and overwhelmed her. The hot currents swept through her like flames, instantly destroying her state of mind and devouring her reason. A monstrous flame of desire rose, and her skin turned bright red. In front of the ecstasy perfume that Wuxia had personally concocted, all the Dharma and meditation techniques had become a joke. The black-clothed Taoist's eyes were burning with lust, and sweat was dripping from all the pores on his body. The sweat was as sticky as glue, giving off an intoxicating aroma. A deep moan came from the Taoist's mouth. She fell to the ground powerlessly, her eyes showing the whites of her eyes and her entire body trembling. On the bed, the eyes of the 8 holy ladies suddenly widened. The originally beautiful, dignified, and amiable holy ladies had suddenly turned into terrifying Rakshas's daughters. Their skin was slightly reddened, and their dignified faces were now covered with a layer of lewd and ferocious expressions. They laughed and threw themselves on the emperor at the same time, using all kinds of mystic arts of the joyful sect to provoke his passion. The emperor, who was fighting fiercely with the Apsaras, felt a wave of pleasure wash over him. He also seemed to smell a subtle fragrance, and all his reason was swallowed up in an instant. When Wuxia came to the emperor's bedchamber, he watched as his body shriveled up, his spirit, energy, and soul sucked away by the Rakshasa transformed from the Apsaras. Even his soul was sucked away by them. Apsaras and Rakshasa were 2 sides of the same coin, and they changed according to one's will. Wuxia, on the other hand, sneered. Sure enough, those old fellows from the Buddhist League and Tao League had done something. If their own people were killed, their souls could escape smoothly and wait for their ascension. But when they were killed by their men, not even their souls were left. It seemed that he would have to remind the upper echelons of the East Sea not to end up with their souls destroyed, which would be heart-wrenching. With a crackling sound, the emperor's mummified corpse shattered and turned into a cloud of ashes that scattered in all directions. The 9 purple flood dragons in his body roared, and were about to flee. Wuxia gave a cold snort, waved his sleeve, and forcibly collected them, then put them away inside his body. The 8 Rakshasa lay on the bed, panting violently. Their minds were so confused by the ecstasy fragrance that they did not notice what was happening in the outside world. With a faint smile on his face, Wuxia spun and teleported out of the room, found his clone wandering outside, and merged with him smoothly. Those who accompanied Wuxia's clone were just some weak immortals, and they could not find Wuxia's trace. Before long, the golden bells in the palace rang, and the ominous news spread throughout the city in an instant. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.